The Technopath by Tao Wong. Narrated by P.J. Morgan. I was always the nurture rather than nature kind of person. Had to be if I had to admit it to myself. You don't grow up with the background that I did, and not hope that it was all about how you were brought up rather than who you came from. Then the change happened. The awakening, the rebirth. You could pick a half-dozen other terms that have been used over the years, ever since humanity realized that those occasional weirdos who turned up in history books or the news had become a regular occurrence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, I've never done a confession before. And sure, I know you're more interested in the proximate reason why I ended up destroying a half a dozen city blocks than the remote reasons, but this is my story, so give me a few seconds. Let me get used to being in handcuffs again. And let me get this confession on the road. So, where was I? Nurture, not nature, right. Aunt Roberta was the best, even if they dumped me in her one-bedroom apartment when she was 34 and I was 3. She never once complained about me upsetting her life, just got on with taking care of me, in between partying it up and breaking through glass ceilings. Lead salesperson at the paper manufacturing plant she was in, beating all the records that her male colleagues ever set, until they gave in and made her the sales manager. It was she who showed me that you could be a woman, hot, and an ass-kicker. I just kind of wish I had her legs. As for my mom, well, I never knew her. I mean, I knew of her, but I never knew her, you know? She never took the time to visit, and Aunt Roberta never told me who she was till I was old enough to keep the secret. And then, of course, Mom was killed in the battle for Philadelphia in '07. Never did get why she was there. It wasn't her usual style. Huh. You're right. Maybe I'll ask the swarm. Anyway, nurture, not nature. I grew up normal, you know? Maybe I got into a few more fights than normal, but having an opinion and being willing to share it didn't always sit well with others. It didn't matter, it wasn't that bad. Kids are kids, you know? And shouting at one another, getting into fights. It was all kind of fun. And then the change happened. I remembered it. Remembered how it was just another Saturday. I was getting ready for work, bagging groceries if you have to know. Aunt Roberta always felt it was important I learn how the world worked early on, so a job it was as a teenager. One second I'm slipping on the store's uniformed polo shirt, and the next I'm smelling frying circuitry. Only realized later that was me. My skin blistered, the nerves in my body feeling like lightning had been shoved down them. My muscles spasmed and locked up, and I remember falling and then twitching on the ground. Thankfully, the entire change hurt so much that my body blanked itself out well before I became a raving lunatic. Way I hear it, that's not always the case for everyone when they change. The change, when it activates, creates a cascade effect all through the body, which means all your genes, all your cells turn on and mutate at the same time, as they attempt to transform into whatever new configuration it needs. It's all a nice way of saying you go from normal human to super in one long, agonizing moment. By the time I woke up, Aunt Roberta had me in the hospital. The antiseptic, overly sterilized smell was not something I wanted to wake to, nor was the constant buzzing. As I managed to get one eye open, I found myself staring blearily around. "Jane, what happened? What did you do?" Aunt Roberta practically shouted the questions at me. "I don't know." I touched my head, found a bandage on it, and frowned. That was also when I saw what had happened to my skin. The way the skin branched out with the burns, the Lichtenberg scars mixed with the glint of silver and steel is quite a sight. I might have screamed. There might have been a breakdown or two. And yeah, if I had realized it, if I had paid attention, I might have caught the first hints of my power. The way the lights flickered, the medical equipment went on a fritz. but it wasn't exactly what I had been paying attention to at that time, especially when I managed to stagger to my feet and catch sight of myself in the mirror. Now, I'm not saying I was anything to look at before the change, but, I wasn't, well, this. I didn't make metal detectors go off at 50 paces, or score high on the Bride of Frankenstein potential list. And I liked my blonde hair, not this platinum thing. I'll admit, though, the eyes are rad. Silver irises are really the hottest thing, as my fans will tell you. But I'm digressing. I should have noticed the change in my power then, but I didn't. And once I calmed down, well, the entire thing happened, The metahuman integration and training department took over. All the testing, the psychiatric visits, the school briefing, the power bracelet, all of it. You'd think for a bureaucratic organization whose entire raison d'etre is handling new soups, they'd be better at it. But nope, they throw you in the deep end and expect you to swim. And I did. I really did. Sure, school sucked. Who wants to hang out with the weird-looking kid with the powers bracelet that might or might not fry you or read your brain or dribble at any moment? Back then, my ability didn't really manifest unless I was under a lot of stress, and with the powers bracelet on, everything was muted. I had no idea what I was doing then. No one did. Anyway, high school was hell. Carlos, who I'd been seeing, on and off, took one look at the freak me and skedaddled between Rosa's legs, that bitch. And the few power lovers had Lenny to hang on to drool over. His power was so much cooler. To 16-year-old kids, anyway. Being made of steel was kind of dumb, but what do I know? Still, I did good, okay. I towed the line. I graduated, even went to college. It might have been community college, but university was out. Ever since it was ruled constitutional to charge soups extra, only the really rich or those who managed to pass as norms could go. Truth be told, I liked community college. They teach you how to do things, not just theory. I kept to the plan, now aided by the burgeoning realization that I had a thing for computers. We were still trying to figure out my powers back then, but we were beginning to realize it was more than just random electric shocks. That's the problem when you rely on technology to find technopaths like me. We slip under the radar if we want it to happen. Because, technopath. Even as we figured out my powers, even as I extended them, it was still kind of piddly, Turning on a phone, adjusting the digital thermometer, accessing a computer without a monitor. Nothing that made anyone too excited, even if it did mean I could diagnose and fix a computer faster than any tech at the nerd herders. I was scheduled for a good life. Until you guys fucked it up. 24 hours ago. Mordant Enterprises loomed above me as I walked into the building. It was over 40 stories tall, not one of the tallest buildings in the city, but like most, made of glass and steel beams. More impressive to those in the know were the 50 stories underground that truly made up the company headquarters. I knew about it. After all, I'd worked in the basement for nearly a decade. I'd been working for them since I was done with university, ever since I finished my master's and began the process of selling my soul. Academia was great. Academia was where I wanted to be. But at that point, my gift had gotten so strong it didn't make sense to stay. Not with the amount of money everyone else was throwing at me to help them build their latest fangled tech. Mordant had also promised that I would be able to get my PhD at the same time I worked for them, doing the kind of research that would be miles ahead of anything I could ever afford to do in academia. No one ever mentioned I'd only be able to apply for my doctorate decades later, if ever, when my NDA ran out and the tech that I was making became public. Once they'd squeezed every dollar they could out of my research, then they'd help make sure I got my proper acknowledgments. I never realized exactly how much they took away from me, how much it would rankle to never be called a doctor. For all that, I spent the first 3/4 of the decade working for Mordant quite blissfully. I was on the cutting edge of research, at first as part of a team, and then later on leading the team itself. Money was never an object, so long as we kept churning out successes. Eventually, after the first half of the decade, they started pressuring us for less theoretical advances and more practical ones. I fell for it. I really did. I bought all their PR. I figured we were doing good things, pushing the edge of science. I picked up the extra RAM, the solid-state hard drive, 3 extra monitors, and the drink cozy, all with the extended warranty of naivety. I felt I owed it to them, after all the money they had sunk into me, into the research that I'd done on their dime. We transitioned to more practical work, keeping cutting-edge theory a mainstay, but beginning to churn out practical successes. Those Everclear contact lenses you're wearing was our first real victory, built using nanoformed molecular circuitry, providing more functionality than anything our competitors had in their piss-poor VR glasses. We made Mordant the bleeding edge of augmented reality, and we kept them there, even when the competitors stole our patents. I look back at our successes in those early years with some pride, even when they took the project away from us and gave it to a new department so that we could work on something new, something better. I didn't mind. I was bored by then, by the project anyway. Theoretical research was important, as was doing something new, and we'd done so much that those with lesser talents, smaller powers, could take over. I wanted more. I wanted to go smaller. As I said, the first 3/4 of my decade I was happy, but the next 2.5 years, when the results started flowing in, and the whispers of what they were using my technology for started arriving, things got worse. Don't give me that look. At first it was all theoretical, building the smallest nanobots, ones that could be harnessed and manufactured, could self-replicate themselves and do what was needed. It was exciting. It was important. What we could do for medicine, for construction, for manufacturing was staggering. The options were limitless. We even solved the gray goo problem. None of our nanites ever lasted beyond a couple of iterations. Even the ones that built new versions of themselves could only do so much before the entire waveform collapsed in on itself. Heck, half our problem was figuring out a way to make the nanites replicate further. That's where my power came in. I could do it, alter the tech on a molecular level, and make thousands of changes in a single test run. My power let me extend and sense why the nanites were breaking down, and then make it stop. Only problem was, the reason why they hated me, needed me, was because I was the only one. As I said, it was all your fault. I walked into Mordant HQ, and if they weren't happy to see me, it was probably because they fired me just the day before. And I wasn't going to just let them take my research, my nanite babies away from me, especially when I knew what they'd been doing with them. When the third all-powers draft occurred, you swept through the country looking for people like us. Unlike most, I had a record. I had nowhere to hide. I never thought I needed to. You found me, drafted me into your damn education program, and even paid for my university. All so that you could exploit my gift, my powers, so that you could see exactly how they worked. With a single pen stroke, we went from second-class citizens to just tools. Once you had your dirty claws on me, you guys stretched my powers to the limit. And yes, not you exactly, but you're all part of the same government chain. So you. The moment there was even a slight push to what I'd been doing, I went from being able to turn on a computer with a touch, to doing it at a glance, to being able to do it with my eyes closed. And then, it just kept on growing. My tech sense expanded every single day, and the range that I was able to achieve anything kept growing. Of course, that wasn't enough for you all. I didn't know it at that time, but you wanted a weapon, didn't you? You wanted another Ultima, a lady power, a solar. Instead, you got me. Just another damn soup, someone with some skill at tech, the ability to affect things a couple of blocks wide. Useful things, convenient things, but it wasn't a city killer, a game changer. I wasn't one of your trumps. Couldn't be. Still, I can't really complain. The school you sent me to was much better than the community college I was at. The lessons I learned were more specialized for my power. The more I learned about technology, the more I understood the science behind it all, the better at manipulating it I became. Instead of just turning on computers, instead of just being able to activate tech around me, I began to learn how to code. My power at times felt like it took over for me, absorbing more of the information than I did. Things that I had studied became clearer, were easier to understand when I used my power, and when the breakthroughs started happening, and I got down into the nitty-gritty of engineering, electricity, tech, when I stopped fiddling around with the buttons on the top and started adjusting things within the computers, the machines you gave me, that's when everyone got really excited. Of course, it wouldn't have mattered. None of it would have mattered without Joey. Sweet, trusting, naive Joey, with his crush on me and his ability to alter matter on a molecular level, to make what I dreamed, what my power saw could be done, come true. He didn't deserve what he got. I think, of all of us, he deserved it least. I walked into Mordant, past their gleaming white windows, past the swinging doors, amidst a throng of workers and contractors that flowed in and out of the main doors. Even if it was towards the end of the day, there were still dozens of hard workers and last-minute contractors moving around. That was the thing about working for a big corporation. It might officially be the end of the day at 5, but if you left early, you could kiss your promotions goodbye. Maybe even your job. The automatic gates of the security station, where they checked our identities as we swiped our badges, stood before me as I walked forward. I kept my head down, trying to blend in as best as I could. I'd put on a wig, playing at being a dirty blonde woman in bulky office clothing. Padding around the hips and stomach and some shoulder pads added to the disguise, making me almost invisible. I hit the gates and held out my gym membership card over the gate itself. At the same time, I extended my tech sense into the gate, accessing the identification software. I scrolled through the database, finding the employee I was masquerading as, and registering myself as her. It was a simple enough matter, especially since I knew that Carol had left the building. I'd been waiting, watching for her exit. Once the gate opened up, I headed straight for the elevators. They always like to make it seem harder in the movies, as though security guards are paying real attention to you and your face, rather than what shows up on their screens. Most security personnel are underpaid, overworked, and just bored. Maybe they would have been more alert if they were expecting trouble. But I'd gone quietly, peacefully, and without a fuss when they fired me yesterday. I didn't utter threats. I didn't declare vengeance or swear I'd make them pay. I packed at my desk, signed all the papers that they wanted me to sign, and let them escort me out. I learned to keep my mouth shut and do what was necessary later from you guys, too. People like to think that the theater of security makes a difference, that all those cameras, all those security guards and police cars, the public order drones keep them safe. Maybe they do, from your average mugger on the street, or the homeless man that assails you for your change. But when it comes to us, when it comes to those with powers, all that technology, of trusting it rather than your own eyes and ears, it's all lies. Just like the lies you guys told. You first introduced Joey and me as just lab partners, making it seem like we were just coincidentally meeting one another. I later learned you'd heavily suggested that he take up the coding class, and on top of that, you had me in Materials Methodology 101 if we didn't get together, just to make sure we didn't miss one another. Once we met and became lab partners, though, you just had to make sure we kept meeting. Not that we needed much encouragement to work together more closely. Even then, there just weren't that many of us with powers. Of course, once you learned about us, it made perfect sense for us to work together on your other tests. The government's personal projects to push our powers to the maximum, to see if we could do something useful with them all. We were young and dumb. We thought you really were the good guys, and so we pitched our ideas, our projects, the new software, and you ate it all up. Those earpieces you're using, the ones embedded deep into your ear canal that you think I don't know are whispering instructions to you, telling you to make sure I stay calm. Those were our first project. Well, at least the first iteration for them. You've improved them quite a bit since Joey and I worked on it. We took apart what you had before, boosted the range, made it so much more comfortable, made it so much easier to integrate and use. It was our first major success. Even if we never did figure out the nonverbal communication option. But mind reading, understanding the impulses in the human brain and translating it properly, that was out of our expertise. I can manipulate technology with a thought, but no matter what anyone tells you, the human brain isn't hardware or software. Not really. I did hear you guys are getting close to cracking the code to nonverbal communication, though. Close enough that you've even started talking about it publicly. Maybe you are, or maybe you're just trying to flush out additional research to steal. It's not my area of expertise, but I wouldn't hold your breath at figuring it out. So where was I? Oh, right. Joey. We worked great together, all through undergraduate school, and then we kept doing it even when I started my master's. Joey wasn't interested. He wanted to be doing practical things, but he stuck around, at least in the first years while we were still in university. He thought he was helping you all, he thought we were helping you all keep the country safe. What was that catchy little slogan? Oh, right. Making a better future for all, powers and humanity alike, all through the leveling ability of technology. And I admit, we got you guys closer, made engines more efficient, and reduced our reliance on gasoline. Faster and simpler communication technologies that could be spread for a low cost to third-world countries. We even worked out the foundation for your capes and masks sensor net, the one you all rely on so heavily to help contain the powers. We never really thought about what layering the entire world with sensors, bent on tracking every exertion of our powers, was going to be like, what you guys were going to do with it. We should have known, if we'd stopped and thought about it. But we were young and naive. Not an excuse, not one I'd accept, but it is the truth. And when you introduced the new Powers Defense Act, added even more restrictions, when you built your ability to enforce it on our sensors, that's when he went rogue, when he chose to walk away. Joey was always a bit more idealistic. He believed in the dreams you sold him on, with all his heart and soul. Maybe if you hadn't been so damn good at selling those lies, he'd still be alive. And I wouldn't be here. Overriding the elevators to head down was simple enough. Of course, once I got through the 4th floor beneath the massive parking garage, I had to switch conveyances. As an added security measure, Mordant didn't allow you to go direct from one elevator to the next, instead forcing you to go through another security checkpoint. This way, even if you managed to make your way through the normal offices, you still needed to bypass their security again. On top of that, you needed to know where to go. The second security checkpoint and elevators behind it were all hidden behind a nondescript door, looking just like any other office. If I hadn't been counting doorways as I walked, I could easily have walked right past the entrance. Of course, after all these years, the counting was second nature. Mordant might be a tech company, but it had never ignored the magical as well, and had hung a bunch of nondescript elemental talismans to make those who had no business within ignore the doorway. That included me these days. But good old science worked, especially when you knew where you were going and why. After all, the enchantments weren't geared to force people who knew what they were doing to look away, just to make the casual bystanders disregard the door and those entering it. I bypassed the doorway security the same way I got through the foyer gates, but once inside, things got trickier. Miss Lindholm, you're not supposed to be here. The pair of security guards who were inside spoke up the moment I walked in. These guys weren't your typical donut eaters, lazy-ass police dropouts, or ex-military washouts. These were professionals. Ajax, the dark-haired, swarthy-skinned speaker, was even a power, just like me. Not a mask or a cape, because he was smart enough to not buy into the entire hero complex garbage. Ajax, check your computer. They called me in to help fix an issue. They hustled me out so fast they didn't get all my passwords, and now they're locked out of some of my research. I dropped my voice and added, they even threatened to sue me if I didn't come back right away. I lied. I lied right through my teeth. The thing was, there were multiple ways of bypassing security like this. You just had to know the right buttons to push. People were like tech in the sense that you just needed to twist them around a little bit, jiggle their sensibilities, and then find the right slot to input the right commands. Do that, and they'd work just like how you wanted them to. Ajax, for example, was the lead in the security room. He wasn't the smartest, but his job didn't need him to be smart. It needed him to follow the rules. While exceptions were uncommon, they weren't impossible. And there were protocols in place when an exception occurred. So he accessed the software, looking for data on my permissions to see if I was telling the truth. And of course they were there. Not because I was accessing anything. Kino, seated next to him, would have noticed me tapping into my power. His ability was simpler. He was a damper. All he did, all he was paid to do, was sit around and make everyone else who had a projection-type power not function. So someone like Ajax, who was all muscle and genetic anomalies, had no issue being next to Kino. But me, I was just a normal human around him. And they knew that. Which is why the bluff worked. I dropped the virus into the main security software the day before, using a modification of an old virus I had on hand as they escorted me away. Lucky for me, the system is an integrated piece, so I only needed access to a security scanner, and the virus went in and stayed dormant till now. Once they accessed my name, the virus went to work. It triggered the creation of my security credentials, backing it up on both ends so that it was earmarked as valid. The credentials were active only for a few hours, just like they expected it to be. I bet you're wondering why I didn't do that upstairs. They're separate systems, layered away from each other for added security against hacking. I could have cracked the other system as well, but the external security system gets swept more often than the internal one. After all, as a forward-facing system, not air-gapped from everything else, it gets hammered all the time by your bored teenage hackers, your budding tech security teams, and the various virus farms out there. Better to slip in, slip out, and do a short, quick burst of security access in one of the least guarded sections, the guard gates themselves, rather than leave code that could be found later. I see that you're supposed to have an escort, Ajax said. He stared, seeing if I had any reaction to that. I gave him what he wanted, sniffing and raising my head, staring down at him over my nose, acting all kinds of affronted, which made him relax even more. Ajax ordered a couple of security personnel to take me on my way. None with powers, of course. We didn't have that many powers to play security escorts for random scientists. But they were geared with the right equipment. Old-school tech, nothing that I could latch onto if I decided to kick up a fuss. No powered armor or sophisticated tasers. Even the guns were old-school gunpowder. Old school is the best school, isn't it? When dealing with little technomancers like me. Just like these iron manacles you have on my hands. Nothing technical, nothing that would let me bypass. Smart. But you learned your lessons well after the Third Powers Defense Act rebellion. You know, none of us really expected you to pass the act. I mean, why was it needed? You drafted us, imprinted us with the chips, cataloged our powers, and trained us so that none of us were dangers to society anymore. Anyone who was either in jail, fled to another country, or a criminal. There was no reason for the Powers Defense Act. At least, no logical reason. other than President Holbrook needing to win an election. With his popularity at an all-time low after the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 incident, he was ready to trade our freedom for votes. What was it the Defense Act was supposed to do? Ah, right. Secure, verify, chip all of us to mute our powers even further. License the use of our powers, the things that made us what we were in very specific ways. Only the ways that you people felt were appropriate. More than that, you wanted to make us live in communes, in specific cities and towns, restrict where we could travel, when. You made us third-class citizens, no better than slaves, forced to live, to breathe at your convenience. Everything that we had taken away. Any freedoms would be considered a privilege, a benediction from those better than us. That didn't go too well for you guys, did it? Even Joey, sweet old Joey, thought it went too far. He joined the protesters. Maybe if you hadn't gotten violent, had actually listened to them, safeguarded them, and did your jobs when they protested nonviolently, when they tried for a peaceful resolution, it wouldn't have gone the way it did. But no, you didn't do that, did you? You stepped aside, let the norms beat them, spit on them, and then when they refused to stop, to leave, you shot them. And when the powers chose to defend themselves, you decided to escalate things further with your SWAT teams and special power groups. Fools. When you started losing, you called it an insurrection. Terrorist action by the powers. You clamped down even harder, going after our families. Our families! Fine. I'll calm down. But you saw what they led to. When the powers that were still working for you stopped, when they stepped aside, and let you deal with the insurrectionists alone. You thought that all your technology, all your vaunted safeguards that people like me and Joey built for you would be enough. But you forgot that if we made it, we could break it even easier. Not that I took part. I told Joey he was a fool right before he joined the protest. I told him we could change your perceptions of us from the inside, that we could show you that we weren't all dangerous, that no matter what they thought, we could be trusted, that once we finished up school, once we got into the real world, we'd make them see the truth. I thought it didn't matter, that someone else could do the heavy lifting if there was lifting needed. I wasn't willing to give up everything I had for people I'd never met. Not when I was doing interesting research, when my life was sordid. That's why your system never marked me off as a higher category threat. I didn't get involved. I just kept doing my research while the world burned. I wasn't involved. Maybe I should have been. Maybe if I had, none of this would have happened. Being escorted down the pale white hallway, lit with 2 bright fluorescent bulbs by a pair of guards, who would not even have dared to glare at me a day before, was a surreal experience. I'd had more attention paid to me as I was frog-marched by my coworkers the day before. The rumor mill had already begun moving, but this time around, the attention was more puzzled. Puzzled, but not that curious. They must have thought something must have been left behind, or something needed to be sorted out before my contract was fully terminated. If they had known exactly what I was working on, they would have realized there was no way Mordant would have ever allowed me back. A decade of research on miniaturization and replication had culminated just months ago. The Mark I Mordant Special Nanite was our crowning glory of hard work and late nights. We'd cracked the problem, figured out how to make the nanites infinitely replicable, or at least close enough for Mordant's purposes. The master nanites were infinitely replicable, if you were me. And even if you weren't, they barely wore down. What they made from everyday materials was less replicable, but they could repeat themselves 12 times. All the materials they used for the child nanites was easily accessible. Carbon, silicone, some trace iron, and other heavy elements. Nothing that couldn't be found in the environment with a little digging. On the other hand, the master nanites, those were irreplaceable because they were made out of the core material, Byzantine. Stupid old Joey, he always named things with the silliest of names. A material only someone like he could have created. Strange how I didn't even know about it until long after his death, when Mordant brought it to me, saying they'd found it in their vaults. They didn't even tell me it was from him, not at first. Not until I pushed for more of it. Then again, Mordaunt was nothing if not paranoid. So I should have known that getting in was never going to be that easy. When we reached the doors of my laboratory, when I tried to access my labs, things went to hell. I'd pushed my hands at the security console, using my stolen guest pass. But they'd upgraded the keypad, set it up so that it wouldn't let me access its database with a flash of power. I tried getting in, but the alarms triggered the moment my power interacted with it. The guards were right on the ball. Maybe Ajax hadn't been as dumb or as trusting as I thought. They had their guns pointed at me the moment the alarms went off, ready to blow my brains out. Disappointing that my attempts at stealth, trickery, and lies had stopped working. Because when your options at justice are a lie, when you can't cheat or steal your way to what you want, then, well, that's when you reach for that last tool. Violence. Most people think, technomancer. That means I don't know how to use my hands, my feet. They forget. We all have histories. We all have a past. Being the weird kid, the daughter of an ex-supervillain, well, you get your ass handed to you regularly in school. If you don't learn to fight back, even a little, simple bullying becomes assault, and eventually it becomes long stays in the hospital, and maybe even homicide. Which, if you think about it, is kind of dumb. Let's put the mass-murdering supervillain's kid into the hospital. No way that is going to end up coming back to bite us. Kids are stupid. Adults, too. It's not as if you all don't know about the kind of bullying, the kind of things that happen in schools across the country. You track it all, you have the stats. All those acts, all that data, it'd be easy. You could have stopped it, find all those innocents like me, help us make our way through life a little easier, help with the nurture part of our upbringing. Maybe you're a nature kind of people, though, figuring it doesn't matter what happens, we'll all turn bad, turn evil. That no matter how many helping hands, how much kindness, people like me will just turn on you. And maybe you're right. I'm here, aren't I? But at the least, you could have tried. I made the lights go out first in the hallway to take away their sight. I didn't need it. I could sense the electric impulses in their bodies well enough to do what I needed. Then I made their earbuds squeal. Much louder, much shriller and higher than they expected. I ran the frequencies so high it took away their balance and made them woozy. Maybe they didn't expect me to be able to access the simple tech in the earpieces. Maybe they just forgot I was the one who made them initially. Maybe they just didn't realize I could do it. I've never shown them I could, because Mordaunt never cared to ask. They wanted me for my skills and knowledge, for what I could build, not what I could break. Once the guards were staggering, it was the simplest thing in the world to take away their guns, and then their handheld tasers and shock them. Low-tech stuff, too low for me to trigger in a useful manner, but perfect if you want to keep someone down. After that, with subtlety no longer required, with the security drones that had been automatically scrambled to deal with me arriving, opening up the door to my old lab was the simplest thing in the world. A little messy and a lot noisy, but simple. When the disturbances turned violent, I was still in school, finishing up my master's. I heard about it first from the news, when the anti-defense brigade took out the Houston Police Department. ADEF went a little far, but at the least they left everyone alive. Crippled, injured, and in need of months of physical therapy, but alive. And the rest of the march went pretty well, now that your instigators weren't taking part. Can you imagine it? A bunch of housewives, mechanics, children, and soldiers, all marching peacefully, letting their power, their gift flow through them in a public display of who they were and doing it peacefully. They made it all the way to City Hall, and then, for a whole night, they stayed and chanted and beat their drums and showed the world we weren't monsters. One night. In the morning, you sent the army in and shot them all up. The June 4th Houston massacre stained our history forever. Every free country in the world condemned us. And worst, it marked the start of the insurrection. ADEF did their best to stop you from hurting them. They really did. But when you dropped bombs from planes kilometers away, they just weren't ready for it. Portland did better. Captain Portland's weed shield saved the city when you guys started dropping bombs again. Madam B charmed all your soldiers, making them put their guns down in Atlanta. And of course, Mr. K and his gang slaughtered the 11th Division, left their heads on a pike. That didn't help. Not when we were trying to explain that we weren't dangerous. But what can you expect when the crazy psychopath took action? It was your actions which made him decide to take action, and no one wants Mr. K to act. The 11th Division slaughter was what put him to the top of your wanted list, briefly. It was what drove him to keep going and going, committing worse atrocities just to recover his placement, and then keep it. Once you figured that out, you all decided not to lower his position anymore, even when he got bored. Took you long enough to understand that psychopath's thinking. Of course, he was just one of a dozen fires you had to deal with during the insurrection. And in the end, I'm not sure it would have mattered whatever Mr. K did. I don't think you were willing to listen to us, willing to repeal the act. President Holbrooke wanted his war, wanted to play the law and order card, and he got his excuse. The guards rolled in, the jackbooted thugs came for all of us. Kicked down the doors, beat up the innocents, the protesters and insurrectionists without care. I missed most of it because I was being the good little girl, working away, keeping my head down. Even my short stint in the internment camp was quite comfortable. The university pulled some strings, along with the military contractors that I did the research for, and helped make sure I was comfortable while I was held captive. It was simple enough with my research to ignore everything going on, the deaths, the screams, the cries of despair. 6 months. It took you guys 6 months and tens of thousands of people dead before you repealed the act. 6 months. And at the end, Joey was dead. I learned about his death through his sister. She slapped me, told me I should have been by his side. He'd put on a cape in the end, called himself the Matter Master. He used the tech, the drones that we built, his power armor, and the control he had over matter to do battle, because he thought it was the right thing to do. He was never a good fighter. It wasn't really part of his power set. Joey could never control matter more than a foot away from his body. His engineering degree let him figure out how to build the power armor, make up for its failings, make it work better than it should have. He wasn't a fighter, but he did his best, and it was pretty damn good. Until you gassed them all at the second peace talks, the one where President Holbrooke had promised they would be safe. Joey believed you. So did Milford and his people. Even when everyone thought he was lying, they believed. And died. But that was Holbrooke's last mistake, because he finally crossed Ultra's line. When the hero of heroes chose to stop standing on the sidelines, he flew President Holbrooke and every single politician and military commander who was in charge of that massacre to the International Criminal Court himself. That's when you all finally repealed the act. Because your shining boy in blue couldn't stand behind you anymore, saying all would be well, that all we had to do was trust the system. Because he told the politicians he wouldn't protect them anymore. I should have seen it back then. When even Ultra stopped thinking that you could be trusted, that any of you could be given an inch of faith. But I was young, and a fool. And while my heart hurt when I grieved for Joey, Mordaunt made their offer. We'd worked with them before, Joey and I, in university. And they knew just what to say, how they weren't a government institution, how all they wanted to do was make life better for the common people. Like a fool, I believed them. I had to move fast, now that I'd made my presence known. I strolled into the lab where its gleaming white walls reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above, the entire lab at least 60 feet across and another 50 feet long. The simple steel tables and the various top-of-the-line scientific equipment were laid out in patterns I'd become long familiar with. We had everything, really, from mass spectrometers and powerful electron microscopes to the special 3D printers for biological and metal material, all of which worked on a molecular scale. It saves us a ton of time, being able to build our nanites directly in the lab. Off to one side, separated from the rest of the lab by a big tempered glass window, was the storage area. Within the reinforced metal and glass storage units were where we contained my research. The Mordant Mark 11 nanites were already packed for transportation in a few days. They'd take the master nanites and the research I'd done and show it all to the government, the military. Take my research and make it just another damn weapon. There were half a dozen personnel within the labs, all of them known to me. None of them were powers, though, since we weren't that common. Yet. Of course, if you believed in the Travis theorem of exponential power growth, you'd probably be underlining that yet. In either case, every single one of the employees shrunk away from me. Ever since the uprising, people have been worried about powers. Even those who, like me, don't have a violent power, are something to be feared. As if we were all maniacs that could burn people to the ground with a single glance. Of course, their reaction might also be because there were a pair of slumped guards in the doorway, and I was holding one of the guns. Either or. I waved them away as I strolled over to the storage door and placed my hands on it. I could have done without touching it, but physical contact has always provided a little bit more oomph for my power. Accessing the door controls was a simple matter, and even if they had the best security systems in play, my ability didn't just transit through tech and electricity. In the last few years, I'd learned I could physically manipulate the matter within tech pieces to some extent. Nowhere near what Joey could do, but within the normal functioning aspects of a machine, I could alter it. It took just about a second before the door hissed open, and at that point, Leo finally decided he had enough. He'd always had a chip on his shoulder, being the only black scientist on the team. He always had to be better, smarter, harder working than everyone else. And if he had a power, he probably would have been the lead. He really was that good. But without one, no matter how hard he worked, no matter how smart he would always be beneath me. He strode right up, and even ignored the gun I pointed at him. I guess he thought I wouldn't actually shoot him. Truth be told, I hadn't really meant to, because I knew how fragile the human body was. At least in the right circumstances. Seriously, it was like a human body was an alpha version of something better. It kept crashing for no good reason, displaying random bugs, and none of it was replicable from person to person. Put a bullet in one person, and they'd just keep going. Put a bullet in another, and they'd fall down, go into shock, and die. What kind of designer would build something with so many safeguards, and then have them fail for no good reason? It's why people who are into the idea of intelligent design aren't very intelligent themselves. There's no way any good engineer would ever release something like humanity. No one with any pride in their work would have looked at humans, with their weird, dangling bits, their constant error problems, and their lack of self-care, and gone, good enough. Still, you are right, I did shoot him. I aimed for his torso. It was a lot safer than shooting him in the leg, where he might bleed out from an impacted blood vessel or shattered bone. Shoulders are horrible too. There's a big blood vessel if you miss, and even if you do hit, physio takes forever. So I shot him in the torso. Left side, lower torso, just above the hips but not too close. There's not a lot that I can damage other than a kidney. The retort from the gun was still ringing in my ears, drowning out his screams as I made my way into the storage room. I gave Leo one last look, as he wasn't screaming very much after the first shot. He'd taken getting shot well, giving off a good whimper and crawling away. I am glad that he is still alive, but I estimated that he would be, what with the on-site medical staff. Once I was in the secured lab, it was a simple matter to gain access to the nanites themselves. Piercing the mobile container's security was simple. Then I just had to store them with me. I made sure to secure a couple extra for easy use before Part 2 of the plan. Part 2 being the part where you're charging me for industrial espionage, which really isn't true since I can't steal my own research, and I definitely didn't steal it for anyone else. I deleted it all from the system. That took a while, especially since I had to make sure I got not just the local servers, but the backup servers too. It was another reason why I chose that specific time, so that I could access the backup servers when the automatic backups started, slipping in a series of viruses to corrupt, overwrite, and delete all the backup data. And I'll admit, I might have been a little sloppy. I only had a day, and I was going for thorough rather than surgical. And with the number of failsafes Mordant used, thorough was important. Luckily, I'd been working with them so long, I'd learned a few neat tricks to work around their backups. I'd always been curious, and figuring out the way the backups worked, the way data, especially research data that might have been accidentally overwritten by idiot interns, was stored, was just something I'd done. Not because of any real nefarious need, but rather the dislike of having to go through proper channels. Anyway, wiping the data on the latest nanite upgrades took much longer than I'd liked, but eventually, I just walked out of the now empty labs. Even Leo had been dragged out. As I left, I held the metal containers containing the nanites clasped in my hands, chilling my skin with each step, offering a soothing comfort that I had gotten what I wanted. Of course, that's when everything else went to hell, because Mordant's internal power security team had finally arrived. As a global technology company, one that had significant interests in some less than stable countries, Mordant had developed their security forces to combat a wide variety of threats. It didn't help that people like the 𝗪𝗏𝗏 and 𝗧𝒵𝗵𝗲 were interested in many of the items they produced. Being on the cutting edge of technology often dragged tech villains to the fore. The good news was that because the company had significant ties to the military, with entire divisions dedicated to supporting the military, they also had access to modern military tactics and arms. Most importantly, they could put their powers through the same training and give them equipment and suits that were as good, if not better, than what most capes used. It was also why the capes were slow to aid Mordant every time they were attacked. After all, Mordant had their own security personnel to deal with mask threats. My first run-in with the power security team was in my 3rd year. My first few years with Mordant were pretty boring. Looking back at it, I'm pretty sure it was just them feeling me out, making sure that the new hire was both as smart and as loyal as they needed me to be. My internal security clearances were pretty low, and back then, most of my research was theoretical. By the 3rd year, though, I'd moved departments again, shifted to a new team, and had finally gotten my feet underneath me. I wasn't the wide-eyed, theoretical-only researcher, filled with studies and hypotheses, but struggling to churn out practical work. Between my power and my studies, I was beginning to shine, and my security clearances had been upgraded. That's when the Tinker decided to attack, in search of a new battery for his multi-limbed power suit. That thing had more arms, and more different kinds of arms, than an octopus had legs. Wait, you do know who the Tinker is, right? Oh, right, he's a local mask, not someone at your level would consider. I don't think he really had much of a career. The Tinker was one of your multi-power masks, focused on tech. He didn't have a skill like mine, but more of a series of minor powers. It enhanced his memory, his kinesthetic sense, his electromagnetic sense, and a little bit of his tactile memory. Basically, he could remember and intuit things better than normal, sometimes a lot better. Because of that, he thought he'd become a tech mask. Except he really wasn't that good. See, I put in the time, the effort, to really study technology in all its forms. You have to if you have a utility skill set like we do. The Tinker, on the other hand, he'd rather buy, borrow, or steal the various tech pieces he used, letting his power intuit how to put it all together. As I understand it, there's a very robust black market for power-created tech pieces. Anything that gets blown up, tossed aside, or falls off the truck ends up on the black market for people like the Tinker. Between the constant alien invasions and the visitors, There's always something new floating around to help people like the Tinker. It was also why his work was shoddy, and often needed new, more powerful energy cores, since he had incredibly low efficiency and power use. Thus the attack on Mordon's facility. He came in with all the subtlety of a juggernaut in tap-dancing shoes, tearing a hole in the wall as he rummaged through our labs. There was a lot of screaming, shouting, and running around before we eventually made it to the parking lot. I got to give it to him, though. The Tinker was never that interested in us as people. That's why, when they finally caught him, he only got 20 years in the pit. He'd have gotten less if he'd had a better lawyer who managed to clear him of the manslaughter charges. That happened when Mordon's power security team came down on him in the facility, blasting away at his suit and throwing him off the building. It was my first close-in view of a power fight, one that took place over 3 blocks. The Tinker eventually got away, leaving the security team in the dust, but the charges stayed. Now, your average Mordon security force consists of 4 powers. You've got the Juggernaut, the guy in the front who's there to take the damage. Then you've got the Weber, the control person who freezes and otherwise restrains targets. Depending on their powers, a good Weber can end threats even before the fight starts. You've got your everyday mobility specialist, the guy who's going to be tasked with keeping non-combat personnel out of the fights, of moving the target into position for the Weber, or just dealing with unexpected threats. Finally, you have the support layer, who is often the team leader. They could be anything from a tactical power to a healer, or even magical support. In the case of the Tinker, the power team leader was a utility tactical support, and on the lower level of the power scale. After all, we weren't a highly restricted research facility. Anyway, that was my first introduction to some of Mordant's more interesting internal power groups. It was my first clue as I was staring at the destruction caused by their security team in pursuit of the Tinker, of how little they really cared about us or anyone else. I admit, it took me days to get rid of the blood from my shirt, where a blasted piece of debris took off one of my coworkers' arms. But back then, I just thought it was an accident. Back then, I accepted their words at face value and figured the health insurance we all had was more than sufficient compensation for the damage. I was getting paid well, and I was no shrinking violet. I've seen blood before, my own and others. Maybe I should have been less callous. But that's kind of what you get when you have a father for a mask, even estranged. The internal security power team that came for me was a Class 3 group. Powerful, stronger than the vast majority, and just a level below your average Cape City response team. I think if Mordant had the ability to staff a Class 4 group, they would have, but Class 3s were still not common. Like, the first group I ever saw were Class 2s. In this case, the support personnel for the security group was a tactician. When I strode into the hallway, the security team had already set up for me. I could try to play it off, act as though I was ready, but as much as I'd like to buffer my ego, they took me down faster than my cousin Bertha does a key lime pie. And if you know cousin Bertha, you'd know that the pie stood no chance at all. Shackled in power-suppressing manacles, they had me up and on the way to the holding cells, while I was still wondering who had set off the fire alarm in my head, or why there was iron in my mouth. As I was slung over the Juggernaut's shoulder, himself leading the way, I got my first proper look at the security team. The tactician was a white-haired lady in full mil-spec AR goggles. They were all wearing the regular Mordant Power security uniform, which basically worked out to be an armored jumpsuit, with a couple of additional pockets for useful items and minor servo upgrades for strength. A tactical belt helped her carry a suite of security tools and non-lethal responses. Lethal responses were all in their powers, which didn't need to be shown off as much. The Juggernaut was a giant of a man with a really nice butt. I got a chance to review it in great detail as he carried me to the jail cells. I have to admit, the waving tail was kind of cute too, the way it poked out of a tiny hole in his jumpsuit, and the way the extra flaps of cloth helped to keep his modesty. I wanted to grab at the poofy thing as it waved in front of my nose, but it kept moving just out of reach. On the other hand, the Juggernaut's brother lacked both his tail and his ripped body. The speedster relied on his power to give him speed, eschewing the need for exercise. His power gave him agility, and some strength that just didn't transfer over to muscle mass. Still, the slant of his eyes, the tilt of their cheekbones and jawline, made it pretty clear the pair were siblings, along with the stenciled last names on their gear. The control member is usually harder to pick out, since they don't really have much need to showcase their abilities. Unless they're purposely showy with elemental forms running around their body or tech all over them, they often look the most normal of the lot. In this case, I only knew of his gift due to office cooler gossip, rather than actual signs. And because I knew what he could do, I made sure to take him out well before he could ever show me his power. And yes, it's true. I really do hate magicians. I know the old saw about sufficiently advanced technology and magic. It doesn't really count when people can wave their hands and open up a dimensional portal to a new universe, one which is staffed by a bunch of human flesh-hungry demons, or when they can blend themselves into shadows and then pop out miles away, or talk to ghosts and learn the secrets of the past. Magic just makes no sense, not according to any scientific principle that has been universally accepted. Now, there's a billion hypotheses on how it interacts, but there's a reason why they're hypotheses and not theories. Magic sucks, and always makes a mess of things by being so unpredictable. So yeah, I hit the magician hard. Sue me. Anyway, I was swinging around on the Juggernaut's shoulder, enjoying the view and recovering my wits. Took me long enough that they eventually tossed me into the holding cell. Funny thing is, those cells were my own design, or at least the blocking technology that was used. It's not the same kind that you guys use, mostly because the cost is much higher, and thus a lot more effective. Tribarium-laced walls that were strong enough that they could take the initial hit by a Class 1 threat. Then the compressed formed carbon underlayer would take the energy and strengthen the entire structure even further, working with the tribarium lacing to increase durability. On top of that, low-level sonic waves were constantly pumped within the holding cells to mess with the prisoner's sense of balance, coordination, and the ability to think. On the outside of the walls, magical glyphs were added by local magicians to seal off the dimensional walls and further suppress magical abilities. Layered on top of it all, the 𝗂𝒐𝒻𝗲 power suppression field. The entire cell was built to hold Class 1 threats, the kind that Ultra fights. There's one such cell in every secret research facility of Mordant's, and sometimes more than one. They're built to keep threats contained long enough for them to bring in their interrogators to extract whatever secrets they might want. And since all this happened in their facility, no one would ever know the details if they didn't want it to get out. The first time they gave me my own team to lead, we created the Everclear contacts. God, what a rush. Morton flew the entire team out to the Bahamas, wined and dined us like dignitaries, and gave us bonuses that would have let me buy a mansion, even in Capital City. It was amazing. Each time we came up with something new, something better, they feted us, made us feel like conquering heroes, made us think we were the best in the world. I never worried about it, not even when we switched over to nanomachine work. Not even when they started asking me about pre-programming specs that looked all too familiar. Once we figured out the program for them to pre-program the nanites themselves, we never saw the personnel from that department again. But then, the waves of assassinations and terror acts happened. So many knives and guns appeared in hands that shouldn't have been able to access them. Heck, even the Secretary of State was killed at his re-election rally. When it came out that Mordant's nanites were the cause of all that, public scrutiny increased. Of course, they blamed it all on corporate espionage, as you remember, and like everyone else, I believed them. We even took classes and seminars on new security protocols. After that, we moved on to building nanites to break down organic matter. At first it was figuring out the difference between decomposing and live matter. The first round of releases helped solve a growing waste problem, doubling the amount of good fertilizer that even the best organic waste recycling groups could make in half the time. And for the old waste piles, where the nanites burrowed into the overflowing landfills with repeated injections, there was nothing like it. Mordaunt was hailed as a deliverer of humanity, an environmental leader, and my team got another huge bonus and 3 months vacation. Of course, we still had the next set of research goals awaiting us when we got back, so it wasn't a complete holiday. They next wanted us to figure out how to break down live matter itself. You can guess where this went. At least this time, the safeguards we had built into the nanites meant that there weren't any mass murders. Could you imagine if the nanites could replicate unendingly and were dropped into a crowded city? Yeah, I can. I had nightmares for months on end when we first started working on the nanites. Of course, we realized the problem with replication soon after, and realized that gray goo nightmares were never going to happen. Then the first rumors started appearing. Next were the news articles of bodies bleached of all organic matter found in hotel rooms, houses, and cars. The corporations and governments in the world had a new secret weapon, one that could be delivered in a variety of ways. The nanites were so small, you could sprinkle it among food like seasoning, eject them into the air as a sneeze, or leave them in water for someone to drink. Too small to see, too easy to bring into contact with the human body. And with the delayed production settings that we built in, you could add little amounts of the nanites constantly until an optimal level was reached within the body. Reached and exceeded. Once turned on, within minutes you would have a slurry of organic matter, rebuilt into dissolving nanites that could be programmed to create or form as 1,000,000 different things, break down every part of a human body, and turn into more nanites before any excess waste made it into an unrecognizable goop. Best part was, since the nanites were relatively unstable, they never lasted very long. You could make gloop, you could make oxygen and methane and nitrogen waste, and a slurry of unrecognizable goop, and let it all just lie there, the actual weapon broken down, untraceable. Eventually, people figured out ways to safeguard against that. Minor electromagnetic pulses, a simple wave of a wand over food and clothing, air filtration systems, even self-defense-oriented nanites that tracked down unwanted intruders and got rid of them before a critical mass was reached. And the critical mass levels were relatively high, because Mordaunt was so focused on large-scale nanite developments that they missed the small-scale use of organic nanites. A tiny dose was all you needed to tear open a vein, an artery in the right location, create a heart attack or an aneurysm, clog up a vessel, making an individual even more prone to a medical accident. It would have been simple to create a real secret weapon. But Mordaunt has always gone for the big bucks, the spectacular showcases of their technology, rather than the most efficient route. Lucky for me. The first person to make an appearance was the internal security chief for the building. I won't describe what happened. I'm sure you can pick up the details from the recordings that they made. Torture, even as brutally and slapdash as he conducted it, is never fun. I probably didn't help my cause either, the way I kept laughing at him throughout the entire process. Why was I laughing? Well, you try not to when you know something that they don't, something that they desperately want to know. Also, I might have turned off the majority of my pain sensors at that point. Mordaunt's internal nerve array chip, part of the Neuralink software scheme that they'd subsidized for all of us, had been as easy to hack as to install. At least, if you're me. The fact that I'd hacked it on the first day they put it in me might be considered the start of my rebellion. Look, back then, I figured it was just what technopaths did. Put tech near us, we make use of it. We make it our own. Now, I'm wondering if past subconscious me knew better. It took just about 14 hours to figure out that I was delaying them. By that point, the nanites I'd swallowed in the lab had replicated themselves sufficiently, pissed, bled, and spat out from my body, and were ready for business. They'd burrowed their way through the floor, replacing material as they dug deep within, until they hit the support structures all around me. And then, they really started replicating, taking from the supports to make more of themselves. I wasn't a bad guy, though. I'm not a bad guy. I had the nanites set off the fire alarm to evacuate everyone as part of their programming. Even if it made them realize they might not be as much in control as they thought, I did it. I tried to give everyone as much time as possible. What happened next was Mordin's fault. They should have realized the flaw in their plans a long time ago. I could get all the offsite backups because they were all hooked into the system itself, but I couldn't touch the off-site, offline physical backups of my research material. The only way to get the on-site backups was to find them physically and destroy them. And unfortunately, the way that they managed and kept these backups, there was no way for me to locate them easily. Now, theoretically, I could have found each of the backups and destroyed them without loss of life. But I just didn't have the time. The nanites could only replicate endlessly while they were within my own power field, and because I was in a suppression field the entire time they were torturing me, I couldn't control the nanites once they were set loose. They just followed the programming I'd created for them, while woozy, half unconscious, and staring at the juggernaut's ass and tail. Anyway, I'm sure you're not that interested in the particular details of how close I came to failing in my breakout attempt. Just for the record, one iteration. It was only one iteration away before the nanites I'd consumed would have stopped working, stopped replicating themselves. You want to know why I took out the city blocks? That really was a matter of failure of education and knowledge. I may be a scientist, but I specialized in cold material sciences, and now nanites. I never studied civil engineering. I didn't really understand the full requirements in terms of load-bearing walls, foundation stability, and their interaction with my nanites. I thought I had done a good job of programming the nanites, but, well, you know, mistakes were made. When I programmed the nanites to take out the underground cell block I was being held in, as well as the facility itself, I knew everyone who'd hidden away in Mordin's underground security bunkers would be safe. They'd been rated to take a hit from a Class 2 blaster. A small building or two dropping on them was small potatoes. What I didn't realize was that in destroying the supports and foundations of the underground facility, it would take out the rest of the neighborhood as well. By the time I came out of my cell, my power returned to me. Things had progressed too far. I'd emerged like a dusty gopher, nanite-formed face mask over my face to deal with the dust in the air, filtering oxygen for me to keep me alive. You guys were here, guns drawn, bright lights pointed at me. Maybe I did overreact a bit after that. But you have to admit, you did greet me with repulsor blasts the moment I poked my head out. After getting tortured for hours, could you really blame me for lashing out a little? Especially when you're screaming at me about all the blood on my body. As if I didn't know I was covered in blood, most of it mine. You know, you could have asked about the snot, the burnt hair before shooting. Still, I have to admit, the fight was kind of fun. So yeah, maybe it really is nature, that no matter how much you try, no matter how much you want to be good, and you try to follow all the right rules, maybe there's a part of us that naturally wants to be bad, wants to be a mask, a supervillain. But I still don't think I'm the villain here. After all, the government was never going to listen to me, give me a proper chance and listen to my side of the story. And Mordin had killed, would kill, even more with my research. I thought I was doing the right thing, taking away the nanites. But now we're here, and you're looking at me accusingly as if I did something wrong. I've told you my story and why I did it. What are you going to do about it? That's what I figured. You want to say that you'll investigate Mordant, that you'll do it the right way. Go through the courts, fight their legal departments, investigate them properly. But it won't matter because they're good at lying. And everything you'll find will show that the research projects were purely scientific, No actual practical applications beyond civilian use. And you'll close the books. And if there's a niggle of worry, of doubt, you'll have to push it aside if you want to stay on the right side of the law. I know how it is. I mean, I believe them too. So yeah, I took things into my own hands. I have enough blood on them already anyway. I should have stopped working for Mordant ages ago. I should have fought in the insurrection. So what if I killed a few dozen civilians? Fine, 103. People died because I made a few mistakes, and I'm sorry they died, and I'm sorry people are hurt. But it's a whole lot less than there would have been if I'd let Mordant keep doing what they did. And if that makes me a mask, a villain, so be it. As they said, maybe it's in my nature to do what's right, no matter the cost, to me or anyone else. That enough of a confession for you? I hope so, because I won't be giving this again. I'll serve my time in whatever facility you send me to, because I did make a mistake with my calculations. I did bring the block down, and I did kill them. I didn't mean to, but I did it. I'll serve my time, peacefully, quietly. One last thing. I know you're listening. I know you acquired this confession, the Mordant Board of Directors. You fried circuit, calcium-covered, burnt silicone wraiths of men in suits. You got this confession, thinking that you're safe, that all your choices are bloodless and without cost. To you, at least. You're less human than the nanites I work with, the technology I manipulate. All you see are just numbers on a financial chart. Well, I'll serve my time here, but don't think that you've escaped my notice. I'm coming for you, and if you send someone after me, trust me, you won't like the results. Then again, I don't think you're going to like the results either way. So toodles, for now. End of the Technopath's confession. As per normal operating procedure, a clean team was sent to deal with the Technopath. They failed, resulting in her escape. The current whereabouts of the Technopath is not known. This has been The Technopath by 𝗬𝗏, narrated by P.J. Morgan. Copyright 2020 by 𝗬𝗏. Production copyright 2021 by 𝗬𝗏. The Paragon by 𝗬𝗏, narrated by P.J. Morgan. Coffee? Tea? Water? Of course, suit yourself. We just wanted to make sure you're comfortable. I'm sorry, this is a bit awkward for us. We don't give interviews, as you know. Statements, press conferences, occasional speeches, but we don't take questions, certainly. Over the decades we've been doing this, we've never really done an interview. Too many questions, too many secrets. But recent events have forced our hand. I think it's about time we explain things to y'all, to the public. We finally reached an accord on this, all of us. It's not something that we do lightly, informing the world. There's some concern that doing so would do even more damage than letting you all continue guessing. But we, think it's time. Time to tell you the truth. That we're just tired. So damn tired of it all. Now, where should we start? The man that you know as Ultra isn't really a man. We are multiple men, and some women. You see, our power is not exactly what you think it is. We are an amalgamation of multiple individuals, absorbed into a single form, given life and strength. We are a combination of minds and souls, and, yes, powers. Maybe it'll help to talk about the first of us, Ultra Prime, if you will. His name is Andrew Hassel II, and his power is what makes us Ultra. what allowed us to become who you see before you. It was his power that gave us all the chance to grow and develop, that damned and saved us all. In so doing, he also sacrificed the most. You must understand, Andrew was born in the early 1800s. In addition, you should understand that he is what you would term neurodivergent. We're not entirely certain to what level and to what form. Yes, he's still here. Sort of. We'll get to that. It's simpler to say his personality, his nature has faded. What little we see, what little we talk to or experience from him, it comes only in flashes. What we've pieced together was that Andrew was an orphan, one that grew up in one of the many orphanages in Britain during that period, working for a living until he was thrown out. Luckily for him, before he starved to death on the streets, his power activated. Or it could be that it had been active even before that, but opportunity and fate never allowed it to show its worth. Lord Pembroke was who Andrew found, who he connected to his body. At that time, Lord Pembroke's power had been mostly unknown, just a minor gift for strength. After all, back then, powers were but legends and myths, tall tales. Maybe 1 in a million or 10 million had one, and even then, it was so minuscule that it was nothing more than what a gifted athlete might have. This was the case with Lord Pembroke. Everyone thought that he was just gifted, so when the street urchin stumbled into him, when the dirty vagrant vomited all over his clothing, and then when he was beaten and bloodied and dying, reactively forced Lord Pembroke to combine with his body, it was considered a scandal. You have to understand, we only know the next part from the records of the British Ministry of Supernatural Affairs. Supposedly, the formation of what would be the second version of Ultra was a truly disgusting event, one that caused a minor riot as the bodies flowed together into a single, fleshy cocoon. If not for the fact that the ministry had been recently formed and was desperately searching for a reason to exist, Ultra as we know it might have ended then and there when the mob calmed down and burned the bodies. Instead, they took the bodies of Lord Pembroke and Andrew, the two congealed together forms, and placed them in a secure location deep in a ministry warehouse, and waited. What came out was the beginning of what would be us, Ultra, a mixture of the genes of both individuals, along with the memory and personalities of either individual. Of course, as a child and neurodivergent as he was, Andrew was not in the driver's seat at that point. Lord Pembroke was, and so began the short-lived adventures of the masked gentleman, traveling through the streets of London, dealing out justice, and testing out the extent of our powers under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Supernatural Affairs, dealing with French saboteurs, killing German spies, and wondering when the next power would trigger, if the next power could trigger. It happened when we fought who would become our arch-enemy, the French saboteur and spy, François Lavelle. François was adaptable, suave, socially cognizant of everyone in the British government's layers of bureaucracy and their foibles. He worked the nobles as part of his job, and every time the masked gentleman found him, they fought, and he would lose. François's body would be shocked, cut, smashed, and in one case, partially dismembered. He would lose, but in losing, his body would escape, and eventually he'd come back. Each and every time. We first thought he was immortal, but one day, while we grappled in the rain on the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, we would both be struck by lightning. We were injured already by then, shot by François as we stepped out from the tiny doorway leading to the roof itself, forced to climb to the top, to stop him from using the explosives he brought with him. The lightning strike was the end, the trigger for Andrew to take over and utilize his power. As our bodies tumbled down the roof together, we combined, the masked gentleman and the immortal Frenchman, joining together to become the next version of 𝗏𝗏. 𝗏𝗏𝗏, if you will. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 emerged from the room that the ministry had slung the flesh cocoon 2 months later. We emerged with the powers of strength and regeneration together, and the ministry was all too ready for us to begin working again. I'm guessing you can guess where all of this is going by now. We would have continued along the same lines, working for the ministry, if it wasn't for the fact that it was Lavelle that we absorbed. It was considered a tragedy at a time, a failure, when his strong personality clashed with Lord Pembroke. The struggle for control between both personalities had consequences that ended in the deaths of too many, innocents and politicians alike. When they realized we could not be controlled, not by them, not by Lord Pembroke, the ministry chose to try to end the problem, permanently. Unfortunately for them, it is really hard to kill us. Even back then, Lavelle's ability to regenerate was quite strong. If it was not so defensive, Pembroke would never have been able to win with his meager strength. The ministry chose to kill us. And obviously, they failed. By the time they allowed us to crawl out of the grave that they buried us within, the disparate personalities of Lord Pembroke and Lavelle had formed an agreement, pushed together by Andrew, who did not like being buried alive. Together we scurried out of London, after taking what little wealth we could carry on us onto the first ship to travel to the New World. We became just another refugee, just another immigrant, trying to get away from the long tendrils of a repressive government, believing that all too commonly spoken lie, that there was something better, something new in the New World, not realizing that, of course, on our backs, on our minds, we carried all the old prejudices, all the old hatreds with us. The fourth power that we gained was what led to the true creation of the being you know as 𝗏𝗏. You see, we were strong, we regenerated, but we weren't immortal back then. Eventually, we would have grown old and died, just at a slower rate. Back then, we weren't much stronger than your average world champion bodybuilder in this day and age. It's amazing what humanity has managed to achieve without powers. Perhaps it's because you don't have powers, that the vast majority of you don't have the ability, so that you turn all that energy, all that drive into your technology, your science, the progression of yourselves. You build, and you innovate without end. You push yourselves to be better, to become greater than what you were before. Is it because you are staring at the backs of those with powers, knowing that without commitment you are but poor copies? Except, you know, you are. Because these cities that we live in come from the mines, are guarded by those with powers. Even some of the greatest inventors of our time, those in the last few decades, are known powers. Their gifts might be more mental, but in the end, we build upon one another, the mundane and the powered, destroying and creating with the very same information. But you are right, we were talking about my fourth power, the one that makes us 𝗏𝗏 in truth. I never really knew her properly, because I found her dying, bleeding from a massacre. Just another victim, another corpse on the great Western dream. A dream paved with blood and broken promises. It's funny, but we merged together by accident again, as we attempted to save her life, as we bled onto her, and she onto us. We had no idea she had a power, or that we would join with her. Luck, perhaps, that the merging happened then, that she had a latent power that was useless by itself. Whispers in the Wind was her name. It was her power that made us what we were. She was a booster in modern parlance, though there was no way to know that. Not with how few powered individuals there were. Someone with her power might never have realized it was available, if not for the touch of fate. We touched, we merged, and then we failed. We went into hibernation, for decades this time, as our bodies tried to compensate for the changes the permanent addition of her powers had given us. Coincidence. All of it was coincidence to help make Ultra. Without Lavelle's regeneration, we could never have replaced the cells when they were destroyed again and again in the combination. Without Pembroke's strength to reinforce our very cells, even the initial surge would have killed us and would have seen our bodies come apart faster than even Lavelle's regeneration could fix it. But all that, combined with the boosting power of whispers in the winds, meant that we changed. When we woke, what had been 3 was now 4. 4 different wills, 4 different souls, each with their own clear opinions of what we should do. Well, except Andrew, of course. And because of the new voices, the new thoughts in our heads, for the first time we took action. Not as part of any government, not because we were told to do so, but because we thought it was right. We took action and tried to change the course of history. You called us the Ghost Warrior, the Unending Indian. I guess you can call him Ultra now, too. We're sorry. I should have realized that learning we were the feared Unending Indian would cause problems. When you're ready, we'll talk again. We're glad to see you've recovered fast. Whispers in the Wind wants us to point out that everyone we killed deserved it. We never killed anyone who didn't, but we might have been a little excessive in our definition of deserved. Anyone who we killed had terrorized or broke promises to our people, and as such were targets back then. No matter if they hid behind their walls, we hunted down the trappers, the hunters who murdered the plains buffalo by the thousands, who spread their diseases or killed the tribes just because. We found the government personnel, the military leaders, and the elected officials, and killed them. And if we included their family members, well, it was only because they did so too. For a long time, decades even, we killed and fought, and were not very specific about our targets by modern standards. Neither were they. But I guess it doesn't really matter now. Not when what we did is now defined as one of the first acts of powered terrorism. Of course, that was a very North American-centric viewpoint. After all, the pair of originals in here point out that the European powers were busy wielding powered personnel of their own brand of terrorist action long before. Then again, our actions were sanctified by the key governments in charge, weren't they? As if a massacre, whether it's done by Mr. K or a government-powered and registered cape, is any different to those killed. Yet you journalists, you mass media, and the public that consumes your work, act as though the words, the actions are really any different, except it gives the governments the right to act, to bring the full apparatus to bear, to ask government-sanctioned powers to act. That's the point, isn't it, for labeling such matters terrorist actions? The goal to stop anyone from raising their hands, of ever trying again. For the retribution that you bring upon them is so many times more than anything that they ever did. And in between, the public say it's fine, because they are terrorists. They deserve it all. It was no different back then. They labeled us lower than humans, undeserving of actual consideration. Savages that needed civilizing. Called what we did brutal and wrong, even though it was no worse than what their very government did. In the end, no matter how many times we soaked our hands in blood, no matter how many we killed, soldiers, settlers, government personnel, they paid it back over and over again, in larger numbers than we could hope to match. I was only one man back then, only able to cover so much ground. We were not the Ultra you see before you. We did not have the full suite of our powers back then. I could not stop it all. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, why we think this is important, now of all times, to talk of this. Be patient. It is important, because our failure, the blood that we have on our hands from that period, those that we killed, and those who suffered from our actions, all that influenced our decisions in the future, in the now. If you want to know why Ultra does what it does, why we do what we do, then you have to understand this. Our time as the unending Indian is important, even if it is not a time that we are proud of. We're not proud of the next few decades. At least during our time as the Ghost Warrior, we tried to do something. We might have failed as often as we succeeded, maybe even made things worse in many cases. But we tried, saved a few tribes from being wiped out in the moment. There are individuals who are alive now because of what we did, cultures that have some semblance of their past preserved. We even managed to wring a few concessions from the government because they feared us. It helped in some cases. We tried for a few decades, and then failed when we gave up. We refused to try again for a long time, just wallowing in our failure. You have to understand, up here, it's not a single voice, not a single personality. It's a chorus that filters in and mixes together, where sometimes one or another personality is more in control, more important. It's why now, today, we're switching how we refer to ourselves. It's a constant buzz in our head, a never-ending chorus of conversations, arguments for or against any single action. Back then, it was a lot quieter, but we still fought. Lavelle and Lord Pembroke were always against what we did to some extent. And of course, Andrew wasn't willing to take action or lead. We couldn't even agree with each other over what kind of action we should take next, not once we failed. Whispers in the wind, the main driving force for our actions, well, she was done. Depressed, as we came across corpse after corpse, village after village destroyed. Her depression, her malaise, it drove us all into the pit of despair. Not that we blame her solely for what we did, not that we did not try to pull her out. It was easier to be alone for a time, easier to just drift, do a little good here, be a little bad there, never trying to really fix anything. I guess our salvation came, as it always did, with another individual, another power. By this point, Andrew's original ability to absorb others, to make them part of himself, had been increased just like the rest of our powers. We were more powerful, more able to make use of both individual powers and individuals. We could even sense when individuals had powers. And Billy was what we needed. He was crippled at a young age by polio, unable to move properly, in constant pain. His family could barely make ends meet. They were seriously considering letting him go. But we recognized him, recognized his power. In that day and age, his power was but a bare candle, guttering and blinking in the winds of his body, insufficient to truly take effect. But we could take him in with us, and using whispers in the wind's power, make it so much more. When his parents chose to finally abandon him one evening, as they trekked through the night, we took him in, because it was the right thing to do, because Andrew wanted us to do so. We were lucky that we chose to heed his desire, because Billy is the best of us. He believed in people. Maybe because his power lets him see them, lets us see them, for what they truly are. Flawed, broken shells, striving for paradise. His power gave us perspective, gives us perspective as we fly over the world. Sees how we wallowed, how small the worries we had were, and how large the problems grew, the ones that we refused to take on. We first took to the air to see the world as it really is, to see not only the small specks of land that we inhabit, but also to understand the stardust that we are, the broken pottery that contains ourselves, and in seeing the earth itself and its glory from above, there was something else we realized. Us, you, civilization itself, we were nothing. Humans, without powers, without gifts, were but a speck on the earth itself. And yet they reached for the stars, crossed oceans without end, with no land in sight, with nothing but a belief that they would find something. To leave their family and their loved ones, to set out into the unknown, and abandoning all that they ever knew and that potentially ever might meet. A drive that had them cross mountains, ford rivers, and sail over the oceans, with nothing but hands and feet and that stubborn mindset and will. You lie, kill, and steal, and yes, make mistakes. The Lord knows you make mistakes. Yet you never stop going. You never stop trying to better yourselves. We learned all that, learned to see all that, because of Billy. Because he let us learn how to fly, but also to marvel when we had grown cynical and tired. He gave us back a reason to try again, to stride through broken streets and shatter the walls of indifference that mark us all, that block us from a brighter future. As I said, Billy is the best of us, even if he doesn't realize it, even if he's too young to really understand. Billy gave us a new reason to be, a new reason to try, and perhaps it was serendipity, perhaps it was just fate, but there were a lot of places to try again. The First World War began, and we were needed on the front lines, helping to save and kill. We tried to avoid the last, because of Billy, because he hated it, hated the blood, the loss of potential. It's why you don't hear much of our time back then. A fast-moving, super-strong corpsman just wasn't as interesting as someone standing on the front lines, taking bullets and throwing around the newfangled tanks. Yes, I'm talking about the Cavalier of Steel, that grand-standing cape who debuted during the First World War. I don't actually know much about him, sorry. He was on the other side of the world after all. I didn't say that? Sorry, we should have clarified. We'd been fighting in the East during that period, which is another reason why you know so little about our time during both world wars. Just another failing in the education system, where wars that didn't involve the Europeans didn't matter, even if more lives were lost on the other battlefronts, even if the atrocities committed were even worse. Even the researchers obsessed about the start of the powers epidemic focus mostly on the West, ignoring the East entirely. Of course, it doesn't help that so much of what happened was never chronicled, because people were either too busy dealing with surviving the wars or recovering from them. The few organizations that did keep records, the triads, the tongs, the Yakuza, and other secretive government organizations, aren't particularly interested in sharing their information with Western governments or journalists. We spent those years mostly saving lives, running from battlefield to battlefield, doing what we could to bring back young boys from the front, to give them a chance to survive. It's where we met Zhang Yang. Like us, he was busy trying to save lives rather than take them. Of course, he worked for another army, but we were tentative allies, and it was the first time we really got close to someone. There were many a night, years of them, spent talking in the dark, where neither of us could do more than just wait for the next bomb to fall, for the next major push, wondering about what we were doing, what good we were truly doing. So many of those we helped save were patched right up and sent back to the front lines. Don't get us wrong, our conversations were a little patchwork. It wasn't as if he had much in terms of English or we Mandarin, but we figured it out. He was the first to learn of our powers, and the first adult we voluntarily absorbed when he was caught running back. We always told— Yes, we. I, you idiot. Told him that you couldn't always be certain of what was happening on a battlefield, but he had to be the hero. We all were. And no matter how fast you move, if there's no place to move to, you'd fail. When they laid down the artillery fire, when they buried the battlefield in flames and shrapnel, he fell. Zhang Yong wants to clarify that he could have gotten away if he wasn't carrying the other two. As it was, he had to protect them from the explosions, which is why he was caught out. Yeah, I don't believe him either. Sorry. We need a moment. There's a bit of an argument again. Our apologies. It happens a lot when we're not busy dealing with emergencies. And of course that volcano off the edge of Fiji forced us to delay a little longer. We diverted the flow of the lava sufficiently to allow the local capes and other first responders to get a handle on it. Took a half hour, especially when you added the time to protect the local monastery. So sorry about that again. The Oracle knows better than to call me for anything but real emergencies. But this wasn't something the others could handle. At least not in the time frame we had. But we guess you don't need me to tell you that. Where were we? Right. Zhang Yong, the wars. We spent a lot of time in the East during that period, doing our best to help and heal, save and rebuild. There was a lot of rebuilding back then. Thankfully, integrating with Zhang Yong allowed us to blend in a little better. Not perfectly, but at least we knew the language, and with so many minds, picking up new languages was quick. In fact, it was rather fascinating how learning happened for us. All of us get the information, our minds access the same brain, but the actual process of memorization and understanding seems to happen on a completely different level. The soul, if you will. The mystic has a bunch of gobbledygook, mystic explanations of what it means and how it happens. But really, it made less sense the more he spoke. You can ask him yourself if you need clarification. Oh? Yes, he is rather hard to get a hold of. I'll put in a good word for you, if the interview goes well. No, it's not a bribe. But you have to admit, journalistic integrity is not what it used to be. Or what we like to think it was. Anyway, learning, souls. The fact that all of us tackle the same problem is why so many of you think we're a genius. And also why, at times, we aren't. The minds that sit in us, that are part of us. We can learn some things easily. Languages, philosophy, speeches, and sociology. But at the end of the day, there are things that we don't pick up or understand as well. Technology, high science. It eludes us at times. There's only so far that you can stretch an 18th century mind before it struggles. At least, ours. Strain? Yes, there is some. We'll get to that, eventually. But we were talking about something else, about my time in the East. And it was a good time, a great time. We missed much of the early start of the Capes and Masks timeline in the West, because we were helping rebuild the cities and countries in the East, finding people who were not meant to be found, rebuilding cities that had been destroyed, battling petty warlords. Yes, we eventually decided to choose to fight. That was Billy's choice. He decided that the bad people needed stopping. After the 6th time we put some of the warlords, the criminal kingpins and mobsters away, and they walked free hours later, he decided it was time to change things. To fight, to kill at times. Not often. Not when there was a chance for mortal justice. But we didn't have the sphere back then to contain powers, and they kept cropping up, more and more often. And mortal, normal prisons weren't built to control powers. Most governments didn't even want to believe that powers, individuals with our abilities, were possible. They'd more often subscribe it to a supernatural entity, a ghost or demon, than a powered individual. Let me tell you, that causes its own set of problems. When the locals shape their descriptions to fit local beliefs, when they refused to listen to reality, but related the very descriptions of individuals or events to their mistaken beliefs. The number of wild goose chases we went on. Never mind. Old complaints. You get a lot of them when you get old like me. The East. It was a good time until it wasn't. When we met 𝗂𝗏, things went bad. Remember how we said belief shaped descriptions? Well, it also can shape powers, as you well know. Deep down, what we believe, what we think, seems to shape, to some extent, the powers we manifest. 𝗂𝗏, real name unknown or discarded, believed he was above all things, a power unto himself. Not a ruler, for that would be a poor emperor, but someone higher even than the emperor. A dragon, and that belief drove his power when it manifested, making him the first known natural Class 1 power. Supernatural strength, unlimited regeneration, scales harder than aircraft carrier plates, the ability to fly and command the wind and water itself. A full oriental dragon, in shape and powers. We clashed more than once. We have to admit, he beat us back then. We weren't strong enough, smart enough to win. Nothing we did could harm him, and he could blast us aside with a twitch of his tail. But he couldn't kill us either. We were just a little too fast, healed a little too quickly for him to finish the fight. In the end, we came to an agreement. We left the East, and he took to ruling the heights of the Nepalese Alps with a lot less ire. He got his annual tithe, and he would only come down to rain his displeasure on those below if it was missed. It isn't the best deal we've ever made, but it works, and truthfully, 𝗂𝗏 isn't the worst out there. Not by far. Our return to America was not the triumphant one that you would expect. We were, after all, no one at that time. Sure, there were a few stories about what we had done in the East, but as with most things back then, stories and heroes of the East were denied and ignored in the West. All for the best, really. By the time we came back, in the 60s, individuals with powers were more common. From the occasional individual with a power, to maybe a dozen or two on the entire continent, to dozens per million, to now dozens per 100,000. The numbers kept climbing as children of powers grew up. And with that growth came the very first masks. Before that, we just called them villains, monsters, enemy agents, and threats. A grab bag of terms for a grab bag of random individuals. Now they started appearing all across the country, all across the world. Different powers, different abilities, different modus operandi. Some were violent, angry young men and women, taking out the ills of the world against those they came across, burning, smashing, metamorphosing others. Angry, greedy, prideful, jealous. All the 7 sins, except sloth, displayed for one and all to see. And there was nothing common among them, except their cowardice, their masks. So that's what we ended up calling them. Masks. At first, the government tried to make use of powers as government employees, just like cops, just like the military personnel that they had been before. But the police, the army, they have bureaucracy. They have red tape. They have to listen and wait before they can react. They have rules and regulations, courses they must pass, and a public to appease. They also were slow. Too slow to really take in all the people who would want to help out. Most people call us the first Cape, but that's a lie. As Ultra, I might have become the first, the most indelible image of what a Cape should be, but I was not the first to take to the streets, to enact justice. That would be the enforcer. Ex-military, back from the Korean Peninsula War where he'd fought other powers just like him. He came back a little broken, a little angry, with a war that he never finished fighting, and rather than put his guns down, he strapped them on again and started the war against other powers back on the streets of Chicago. He fought not just the masks who were making themselves known, who'd been hired by the mob, but the mob themselves. It was a bloody, bloody time. In a year, there were multiple copycats, not just powers, but human vigilantes too. Violence crawling out from every corner of the suburbs into blood-strewn alleyways of the cities. The harder the police tried to find the enforcer, the more powers he put down, the more criminals he hurt, and the longer there were no actual consequences to his actions, the greater the number of vigilantes there were. We watched it all. At first, we just wanted a normal life, a life that didn't involve grandstanding or heroics, at least not the powered kind. We worked as a paramedic, saved people the mundane way, failed to save them all too often. We tried to keep our head down, but every night, every morning, the news about the enforcer and his copycats grew. Then he went too far. They went too far. You get it now. The Monroe Elementary School massacre, where one of the many vigilantes went completely out of control. They'd found the identity of one of the masked pairs in play, the Shocker too, who'd left their children to be taken care by their family. Left because they were scared they'd bring trouble to them. But it wasn't enough, not for the fanatics. They went after the kids, hoping to draw the Shocker 2 out. Mask? No, it was one of the vigilante wannabes. It was just the media who called him a mask, later. Before, when he was helping, when he was hunting down the bad guys, leaving them cut up and bloody, they'd called him a hero. The lethal blade. Sounded so good, so right for a seeker of justice. But that wasn't what you were looking for, not really. You, the public, wanted vengeance, not justice, and he played right into it. So yes, he was a hero, a vigilante, until the massacre. When that thread of sanity that he'd been holding on to shattered, under the screams of little children who decided the crazy man wielding a sword and holding their friends hostage was a bad man. When we saw the headlines the next day, something broke. Inside all of us, but in Billy most of all. He ranted and raved all through our shift, all the way back and forth, while we failed to pull a man free from his car, even though we could have, if we hadn't been hiding who we were, to the pair of children we had to drive to the hospital, because we weren't there to catch them when they fell from their trees, and on and on. By the end of the shift, we did what Billy asked us to. We did what he needed us to do. We put on the suit, the one that Zhang Yong helped us sew that very evening. We took to the skies to do what we could, when we could. We became Ultra, in truth. The cape? That was Billy's idea. It's strange. The world outside, for the new capes, is so different. They have to worry about this social media of yours, the ever-present watching eyes of the world. No more are we worried about just your peers, but the words, the views of the lowest and most ignorant members of society. The mistakes that they make are writ large, never to be forgotten. In that pressure bowl of criticism, they are expected to function and make a name for themselves, to become the heroes that they must eventually be. How many have we lost? Kid Strong, Mistress X, Xanatos, High Beam. Those are just names for some of you, quick news cycle stories. For others, heroes who appeared on the darkest days of their lives. And for a single individual sometimes, or a group, a mistake. Now they've left or changed their names, or worse, turned mask, because it's easier sometimes to do good when you're a mask than as a cape in these days, or so it seems. Every misstep, every mistake, every death, hauled before the judges, before the courts of law, grilled by tribunals and the administration, all to explain to people who do not understand why you made a mistake. We fear at some point you will drive away all those who would serve, and be left with those who know how best to lie and convince, rather than those who truly care to do the job. Yet perhaps this oversight is for the best. Billy and Zhang Yang and others have never been happy with the actions of those like Vengeance and the Raven. The things that they did, that Diamond Kiss did, to the men who hurt her, to the men who hurt women and others. It was not right. There is justice and there is punishment, and then there is torture. And they leaned too far the other way, crossed lines that no cape should. Maybe the needle swung too far one way, and now it's swinging too far the other. Reverting to the mean is often a matter of large changes, on both sides rather than a steady and optimal average. But we were talking about our start, were we not? We apologize. It was remembering my own start, our mistakes when we began, that brought me to that thought. Much of the training, much of what we learnt in those years, were later added to the curriculum for new capes. Sheer strength, picking out load-bearing walls, chemical interactions in common household wares, rupture points for gasoline vehicles, basic physics and power interactions. Every item in the cape training courses, in even the broader curriculum for those with powers, has a story behind them. Stopping cars by standing before them seems like a great idea, until you saw your fleeing robbery suspects spat out the other end before seatbelts were a thing, or had the road cave beneath your feet because you forgot there was a sewer line beneath you. Walking forwards into a hail of Tommy gun bullets, marvelously heroic, but ricochets kill civilians just as much as the actual shot. Flying with capes. Backwash is a problem for so many. We made mistakes, so many of them, sometimes trying to be more heroic than we could be. Sometimes, well, because we never knew better. Speaking in generalities, yes, we are. We do not care to provide further details, while what we are, insulates us from much of the public pressure we spoke of. There are still some concerns. Opposition to us helping, due to anger or fear over acts long in the past, mistakes long in the past, would be counterproductive. So yes, we will speak in generalities, especially since I do not manage to make all those mistakes myself. Suffice to say, our first few years were filled with errors, unforced and otherwise. We made mistakes, some that we will never make again, because we were not the ultra you know now, for we lacked a few others. Yes, there were others, more than you'd think, but probably less than you fear. Some will not be disclosed, for reasons of safety, for ourselves, for them, for our own privacy. We had others join us, and it was they who added to our strength, to make us the ultra that you know. We'll name a few more, never fear. But those early years, they were hard. Many of those who started back then have left, grown too old, fallen due to mistakes at the hands of the villains. Fewer than you'd think for the fallen. We were fighting the early versions of the masks, and more basic human criminals. It's still most of our job, really, dealing with normal criminals, no matter what the press might say. Though back then, there was a code of sorts, not to the same extent as some of the others might tell you, but we didn't put family members of capes into acid barrels or skin them and the capes alive. Those first few years were hard, But those of us that survived it, that were present back then, we became lifelong friends and forged a bond. Many of you wonder why we put up with vengeance, why we let him get away with things for as long as we did. It was because he was a friend from the beginning, when we were all learning the ropes and trading tips and recommendations. We all made mistakes then, though not all of it was driven by anger like his. Oh yes, I know who he is, really is. But no, I will not tell you, or the authorities. Let it rest. The ex-cape you know as Vengeance is no longer active and will not be. The crimes he enacted, the things he did, they are in the past, and no punishment you can level at him will matter. Trust me on this. Or don't. Did you find the washroom all right? Yes, it's a little large, the building. The security droids? Oh, those acquired those from an invading spaceship in the 90s. No, you won't find it in the records. We met them outside the solar system when we were coming back from another incident and dealt with it. The droids were the only thing remaining of the invaders, and it took Dr. Majestic a month to reprogram them. He keeps saying he'll be back to look at them, but you know how he is. If he could focus, he'd be so much more effective. Now, where were we? Oh yes, if there was a golden time to be a cape, it was in the mid-60s, the years after we started taking active action. Crime had devolved such that the police were taking any help they could get. The media and the public loved us, loved the image of swashbuckling heroes in festive colors. They crowed over every victory, every life saved. Our mistakes were brushed under the carpet, and we learned enough by then to not make the truly egregious ones. Even the sidekicks, many of your senior capes now, were young and fresh. So many of them wanted to learn from us, and we had something to teach. We could guide them around the mistakes we made, teach them how to avoid causing the tragedies we had. Do good, without causing pain and suffering by accident. It's why so many of that generation are still around, when so few of the originals aren't. They don't have the nightmares that we do, the regrets. Sorry, we're growing maudlin, or so we're informed. We were talking of the Golden Age, the time when everyone loved us, when things went well and the criminals fought back, but still had morals. Things got harder, though, worse as time went on. We went into abeyance soon after, when the wars in South America, in Vietnam and other places intensified, when the government tried to drag us into their wars and draft us. So many of us went into hiding, or when we did act out, it was as though we were masks too, vigilantes. Except for those that joined, of course. They used masks and capes back then, not caring. It was a way to rehabilitate the masks, we were told. A chance for the craziest to do things that they should not have. They were forced to work together. That went as well as you'd expect. I'll admit we were conflicted at first, whether to join. We did before, if you remember, or to stay away. But then 𝗵𝗲 arrived. Ah, you remember him. He killed 𝗓𝗏 and put Heatwave into a coma. He robbed a dozen banks, and when he went after the Federal Reserve, we moved to stop him. And he crippled us, took over our minds, set us into conflict with one another, gloated over our body while we writhed on the ground. We were done for. If it was not for Andrew coming back, stepping forward for a few precious seconds to take over our body, well, we would have been lost then. What happened? We absorbed him. That had unfortunate consequences, though. 𝗵𝗲 was the first one to be absorbed, who fought the actual process. He was also the first mentalist. We managed to make our way home, managed to hide ourselves in our lair. No, not this one. Another one, long abandoned. After that, We spent the next few years dealing with the fallout. It's why we weren't around. It wasn't a choice to join the government or not. We were not in a position, in a mind, to help out. The damage 𝗵𝗲 did, fighting us fighting him. It continued. It meant we were not safe to be around, not safe to make the split-second decisions heroing requires. We ran, we hid, we fought, and then finally we healed. And yes, we gained from it. It would never happen to us again, though much of 𝗵𝗲's power had changed by the time we were able to fully absorb it, make it ours. We lost his ability to manipulate and attack others, but in turn we had the strongest mind, the defenses that would make it impossible for another to do what he did. In the end, when we came back, it was the '80s, and the world had changed on us once again. That's right. Compound X, the X gene, the blue liquid of soups, the cape maker and the mask origin, had hit the streets. It was the hottest-selling drug out there, not only because it gave people powers, but because you had to keep taking it if you didn't want to die. So many didn't survive the initial change. Fewer would survive the change back. And even fewer ever kept the powers the drug gave them and survived being weaned off it. By the time we returned, things had gotten worse than they ever had. Crime was no longer rampant. It was a fact of life. No one managed to escape its grip. Those few powers who came back from the wars were hard-bitten, scarred by their time. Their reaction to the crime, to the damage the drugs were causing on the streets and in the offices of the wealthy, were even more extreme. Is it any wonder, then, that the government felt the need to control the powers, that they started with the first version of the Power Defense Act? What did we call it? Oh yes, the National Power Defense Security Schedule. It was just a way to take control of the powers, the masks and capes, and legitimize throwing many into jail. They'd already had a taste of control with those they drafted into the army, and found it suited them. And by this time, the public was willing to accept the new laws. The pristine image, the goodwill of times past, had been marred by the revelations of what the capes, the powers, and the masks did in those countries in the name of patriotism, by the lack of results of the vigilantes, and the few capes that had stayed behind had achieved. Even we were unable to stem it, not really. Oh, we took over Solar City and kept it safe, drove out the dealers, made sure the few masks that dared step foot in the city did so quietly and well within regulations. But to do even that much, we had to patrol day and night, bend the rules around searches and privacy. Even then we failed when bigger problems, bigger disasters struck, when other capes called for aid. The Union had limped along, even when Ultra was gone. With our return, the Union became more important, could throw its weight around a little more. We put a stop to some of the worst masks, took on dangers that no single hero could manage. The Xeno Rain incident was our shining moment in the '80s, when we worked to destroy and clear the infected alien meteor shower attack. Without us, the damage would have been a lot worse. Even then, we lost so many that day. Surely you know. Yes, it has been decades. I was in space, not on Earth, destroying and diverting the largest of the meteors before they entered the atmosphere. There were not, there still aren't, that many of us who can navigate the deep reaches of our solar system with impunity. It was our job to stop the planet-ending asteroids. We managed that, at the least. If not for the mystic, none of us would have known about the danger until it was too late. But between my duties to the Union, the crises that arose regularly from natural disasters, and patrolling Star City, I could do little to stem the tide of Compound X. The labs we found never had the full recipe. for they were but tasked with combining portions of the actual formula or the ingredients for another lab. Trying to work backwards broke the compound itself, even when we managed to acquire the final ingredients. We were always missing something, some method, some ingredient. Of course, we now know what it is. But back then, it puzzled us how even the greatest minds in the world failed to discern what it was in the drug that created the effect. It was when the Drake died that we realized that it was all his doing, all his venom that empowered it. Not a biological process, but a semi-magical and powered one. It was a long decade of excess and crime, of a changing society where the distinction between those who had and had not grew ever more, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of powers. So many new powers were coming to the fore that the government began the process of clamping down, of training. The first few public classes were held in the late 80s, even as Compound X ravaged the lands. More hidden lessons were provided, deep underground, to the mutants, to the users, rather than let new powers, new mutant powers, run about untrained. Many of the same official liaisons gave such training underground. It didn't take long for those classes to be more well attended than the official classes, which ticked off the government to no end. After all, they could not register those who did not turn up. The NPDSS died in its registration attempts, its voluntary aspects defeated by their very own people. Of course, the longer-lasting aspects, the legal persecution, the jailing of masks in places like the Hexagon, without trial by a jury of their peers, the erosion of rights for powers, and the militarization of the police forces, all of those stemmed from that first piece of legislation. Without it, the Powers Defense Act would never have come about. What do I think about the PDA? In its origin, or the many forms and amendments since its first formation in the early 90s? Anything, you say? Well, I think it was inevitable. There were too many powers, too many individuals with superhuman abilities appearing for our piecemeal training attempts to hold. It was workable in the 60s, even in the 70s when the numbers were smaller. But Compound X, the Drake's final act, the conjunction of power growth in new generations, turned all our beliefs over. No longer is there one every 10 million or so humans. Now perhaps we have what, one in every 10,000? One in 5,000? The numbers keep changing, and so many have their powers be so slight they are missed. But that number keeps increasing. Someone had to train them. Someone had to show them the way. And while there were piecemeal attempts, the Academy for Superhumans, the Cult of Powers, the Brotherhood of the Evolved all come to mind for one reason or another. They were stymied by their lack of knowledge and resources. The results of their failures were spectacular. The 80s were one long, long experiment at that kind of failure. Even with the registration and training we'd provided them via the NPDSS, it was insufficient. It was too piecemeal, too reactionary. Powers left untrained went to war with our desire for freedom and security. The Armando School massacre, the Houston Sunset Hotel tragedy, the San Antonio 4th of July federal incident, tragedy again and again. Other countries, other nations, had their own solutions. The Maui massacre, the New Zealand extra-normal list, the Caribbean free power zone. We saw the results that arose from all these tests, from places like Sweden, Morocco, and Singapore. But they are much smaller, less dense locations, or locations with a much higher degree of everyday surveillance. The number of powered individuals they contained were easier to watch, their communities stronger. Those solutions could not hold, not for the United States. In the vast majority of dense locales, The Powers Defense Act, the registration and training, the use of null power bracers were necessary. So yes, I am a proponent of the first act. As for the amendment since then, well, there have been so many. But that's what you want to ask, isn't it? Why it took us so long to act? Why it took us so long to act during the Third Powers Defense Act protests? Why we held off? We have no convenient excuse. Not like in the 70s, no. It is a matter of public record that we were still on active duty then. We held off because we were conflicted. We'd learned our lesson in the 90s about the government, about being too active. We tried, we really did, to warn you about angering the undersea kingdoms. We politicked. We spoke at the United Nations headquarters. We attempted to be the go-between. And what happened, we ask you? You refused to listen. You let the corporations, the masks, and the rich dictate your policies. Every peace, every legislation we brokered, you broke. You poured pollution into the oceans, discarded your plastics, and fished their food stocks to oblivion. And when they protested, you killed their diplomats and headmen, and said nothing happened. When the undersea wars happened, you asked us to defend you. To defend you! We still did, because no matter what, the civilians had little to do with the mistakes that were made. So many lives lost. So many buildings and cities swamped. For what? To keep a few corrupt senators and MPs elected? To pad the bottom line of a few corporations? How many of them survived after their plants were destroyed, their factories razed, their CEOs assassinated? How many were taken over with the undersea gold that the kingdoms brought to shore? Horrible. We learned our lesson then. Keep silent. Stay away from politics. Keep away so that the public, you, can choose to make your own mistakes rather than blame us. Reserve our actions and choices, because otherwise, when we spoke, no one listened. We refocused on doing the things that only we could do. Fighting alien invasions, taking care of natural disasters, lifting planes and holding up crumbling towers. So when the Third Powers Defense Act was voted upon, we held back. We debated and talked internally, weighing our options. We thought it was best to let the public, the politicians, and the other powers decide their future. Perhaps we were gun-shy. Perhaps we wanted to avoid being marked for doing the wrong thing. Again. We ended up doing the wrong thing anyway, didn't we? By not choosing. Eventually, you gave us no choice. Eventually, we all agreed that the government, the public, you, had gone too far. When even Mentat, in his own way, sees you are doing wrong, perhaps you should reconsider how far down the road of justifiable evil you have gone. Even so, for all that you might want to ascribe the ceasefire to us, we but placed the leaders in a position where they had to speak to one another. I'll admit, it was a stroke of genius on our part to put them on the Brotherhood space station until they had finished talking. Yes, you are right. I am confirming that happened. Speaking of that... 1 second. It seems there's been an incident. Do you mind if we relocate for a moment? Not an issue, just don't faint. We'll cover the ascent. Just put the helmet on. Here we go. Try not to scream too much. Sorry about that. Just a lost spaceship, it seems. No one else spoke Velvies, though, and we were the closest to being on board. The view? Yes, it is beautiful. We forget sometimes, since we fly up here so often. But where were we? Right, the reason for the interview. The 𝗂𝗵𝗲 War, our disappearance for the few years soon after the start, and then our return and the actions we took. But it seems I have prattled on for too long, speaking around the matter but not truly answering the question. I'm sorry. We're sorry. It seems that at times we forget. No, the oracle knows. My time is truly up. To answer the question, during the war, the Mazghani race cast a spell, ripped out the souls of all those controlling our body, and imprisoned them. In so doing, they left a husk that could easily be replaced, which the Mazghani emperor, dying from old age, did. The last few years, during the war, afterwards, and my time on Earth, we were not in control. That gem that we started sporting on my belt, that held our souls. Why did they keep us close? Our powers. It seems our powers are linked to our souls, and if they move too far away, the powers leave the body itself. They had to keep us close, because how else were they to indulge in being ultra? It was only when the gem was destroyed in the last month, during the battle with the 𝗧𝗵𝗲, that we regained control of our own body. And that was only because there was another surprise within. You see, the mixture of souls within a body, the emptying of the body of our soul's control, while tethering it to the body to empower it with our powers, along with the period of hibernation before the Mazghani emperor took over, had created a rather interesting phenomenon. The mystic can provide a deeper and more esoteric explanation. To simplify, in the time that we were gone, or perhaps even during our time together, a soul had been born, a new one that took who we were, that studied our actions, our beliefs, and grew. A soul that, when we fought the Mazghani emperor and were losing, emerged from hiding and aided us. In turn, it now is part of us, is us more often than not. We, the other souls, the other minds that make up Ultra, are too weak now. Some of us were damaged to an extent that we no longer speak. 𝗵𝗲 was one of those, sacrificing himself to take the brunt of the attacks. He is but a wisp now in our minds. There were others, many who never wanted to be known for more. Now, Ultra, me. I am part of them, the controlling body, but also not. I don't know what will happen. I learned a lot from their mistakes. I continue to learn from them, listen to them speak. Occasionally, I am them. They are me. The damage done by the Emperor was great. In our battle, in our actions, we have begun to merge even more. Perhaps it was the magic. Perhaps it is just an evolution of Andrew's ability. After all, he merged with us, with the rest, a long time ago. So, yes, while we do not take responsibility for the actions of the Emperor, overbearing, spiteful, and short-sighted as they might have been, we do not believe the Ultra that you know will be what you see, nor do we, think we should hide behind the veil of secrecy anymore. I told you at the start of this interview, it would be an explanation of what happened. There you go. The Ultra that you knew is no more, and is still here. What happens from now on, we will find out. Now, there's a volcano blowing up in Indonesia and too few heroes. If there are not more questions... will I take active part in politics again? Perhaps. We failed before when we tried. We failed again when we didn't. We have done great harm and great good in equal measure. Those mistakes were theirs. But the future is always an opportunity to make new mistakes, is it not? Or the old ones again. So, perhaps. Let the Watcher know when you're ready to go home. He'll arrange for your return to Earth. So ends the first recorded interview of Ultra, the Many-Souled. An abbreviated interview was later run on the USNN with its startling revelations. Thus began the 𝗧𝗏𝗃, his eventual seclusion on the moon, before his return during the fall of Egypt. Would you like to learn more? This has been The Paragon by Tao Wang, narrated by P.J. Morgan. Copyright 2021 by Tao Wang. Production copyright 2021 by Tao Wang. The Cultist, a Power Masks and Capes novelette by Tao Wang, performed by P.J. Morgan. I knew better, but I did it anyway. What can I say? I've always been a weak man. When I first gained my powers, I was 38 and a loser. Sure, I had a decent job, managing logistics for a multinational company. But it wasn't an important job. All I did was make sure the containers from one factory made it to another. Yes, it was both more and significantly less complicated than that. But compared to someone like the Paragon or the Vigilante, capes who had saved the world over and over again, loser. It's hard, living in a world where gods, in all but name, walk the earth. Where celebrities who are famous for nothing more than being famous and pretty, or having a cool, or different, power exist. Where the rich flaunt their wealth, the con men tell you how small you are, and the religious rant about how we're all going to hell. Where meteors rain down upon you because some damn alien you've never heard of got upset because one of your capes got into his face. Where Johnny down the street gets recruited during the third All Powers Act. Hard not to feel small, not to feel insignificant. Why do you think most people get on drugs, drink themselves silly, or spend days and nights scrolling social media? Why groupies for the powers, in all their forms, emerge, even amongst people we might think have it all? Hard, and it takes a big man not to feel down. So you understand why, when I felt the first inkling of my power coming alive, I chose to exploit it? Without training, without testing, just straight into the deep end. A fool's choice, but I was a fool. Still am. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with a girl. Not a pretty one or a powerful one, or even one who caught my eye, but a child. Mints. Thin mints. A half-dozen boxes. They were my favorite kind, really. Now I can't even look at them. The boxes were meant for 𝗧𝗏𝗏, said with a fake-as-her-tits French accent. She was my upstairs neighbor in the condo building, and had accosted the Power Scouts before they made it to my floor when she spotted them on the way up. She'd bought them out of all their Thin Mints, because she could, and promised payment later. I wanted them for myself, wanted something to go my way that day. So I said so. And for the first time ever, I got what I wanted, even when it was wrong. The kid handed over the mints and took my money and left, all the happier for having been paid twice. Shut up, 𝗧𝗏𝗏. That's what I told her when she came to complain. She did, of course. Why don't you go do your damn fitness aerobics class again? Your ass is getting fat. It wasn't, but she left. And that damn application I could always hear through the thin floor joists that separated us had right away. The all-too-cheery voice telling them to pick up their feet and put some energy into it still haunts my dreams. I probably should have realized the problems then. I probably should have stopped. But I wielded my power again the next day, and the day after, testing the feel of my power flexing itself, growing as it worked on others. A thrill ran through me with each flexing of ability. Each time someone did what I wanted without questioning, without protesting. Small uses. An extra donut with my coffee from the barista down the street. No harm done, just a chain store that wouldn't even notice the unrung purchase. A nudge to a bigger man there. Watching him walk into the slush pile of leaves and melted snow as autumn turned to winter because he wasn't about to shift course. He was the bigger man, right? You know how they are, and how annoying it can be to give way. Getting my documents approved before the others by the director, so I wouldn't have to wait around like the rest of the peons, late into the night, when he got back from golf. Each time, that frisson of energy, that pulling sensation as my power worked. I figured out what was happening easily enough. Understood that this wasn't coincidence, but me using a power. Maybe others can mistake their powers for something else. Coincidence, fate, maybe a burst of adrenaline or a natural hardening. Some never even notice they have powers till they're much older. The man who glowed like a nightlight, but only when he was asleep, famously being outed by his new boyfriend. The mechanic on that racing team, whose ability to reduce the frictional coefficient of lubricants got the team disqualified for unauthorized use of powers. The girl with 25/20 vision, who just hadn't realized no one else could see as well as she did. Small things, trivial powers. In another time, another place, they might be called freaks, anomalies. Not for me. Not the way my power made me feel. Not the way it let me feel my victim's emotions. But I should probably tell you what my power really is, shouldn't I? The government, the U.S. government, classifies my power as one of the restricted kinds by law. Mental or social manipulation with a power rating of a minimum of 3 on the 𝗂𝗏𝗏 combined power scale. Mine specifically is a linked internal-external projected power at a rating of 8. Quite the mouthful, isn't it? Probably doesn't tell you much at all, unless you're a powers groupie, or read government documents for fun. Here's what it does, in simple terms. I manipulate the emotions and thoughts of individuals around me. I project my needs to them, verbally, as you might have guessed, and subconsciously alter their feelings and mental processes, such that they seek to give me what I want. Most of what I do is on the subconscious level, rather than the direct manipulation of thoughts. No surprise, this is partly why they call me the cultist these days. I'm not a mind controller like Overlord, or even a benign influencer like the Red Siren and her singing. She is, by the way, a social manipulator with a power rating of 17, sometimes 19 in periods of high stress. That means she can influence large crowds and even individuals over electronic surveillance and digital channeling. If it weren't for the fact that her manipulation only goes toward positive emotions, she would be considered a real threat. Even then, if you look closely, you'll always see at least 2 government agents watching her at all times during mass concerts, and a single one otherwise. Those agents are either nullers themselves, or have Morris tech to stop her ability. The government doesn't like those of us with the power to alter their voters' minds, running around free and clear. Not unless you work for them. Oh, me? Nah. Don't get me wrong, I've had the offers. They always come if you're above a certain registered power level. And I'm not morally opposed to the money or influence. But the kind of controls they want, the way they follow you around, tag you, and watch, not for me. A slave in fine quarters is still a slave. Sorry, I can see you're getting bored. You wanted to know about my first attempt at heroics, right? Yeah, why not? We're here to talk about my failures anyway. They called him the Hippo. The press, you people, that is. I don't think he actually had a villain name when he started. Just another victim of mutagen 13. You call us villains, but when a corporation spends decades dumping, on purpose, billions of tons of a chemical mutagen that can accelerate the presentation of a power, you let them get away with it, with nothing more than a fine and some light sentencing for lower managers. Don't give me that bullshit that it was never proven. I could prove it tomorrow if your courts hadn't ruled that power-enforced or acquired confessions are inadmissible. Just because your courts and politicians were bought out doesn't mean we don't know what we know. Anyway, they had much as admitted it when they revealed the more stable method to create a series of mutations barely 3 years later. Compound X, promising to give people powers, real powers, with minimal side effects and with an 85% degree of accuracy. Still no promise of what exactly you'd get beyond broad parameters. And no power that has come out of those trials has ever breached level 8. No wonder power swim parties down the Colorado River and in the cordoned lakes are still a thing. No wonder Cape Maker and Mask Origin are still the hottest selling drugs. Why settle for being less when you could be champion? Or at least close enough. No one ever talks about the gators, the folk, or the other less desirable mutations. Sorry, where were we? Right, Hippo. He and 3 of his buddies had hit a jewelry store and were running for it. Stupidly, they hadn't checked what running away with a mask nicknamed Hippo would do to their vehicle's top speed. Let me be clear. The answer is nothing good. They had no cornering abilities at all. Swung out like a football field-long trailer, what with Hippo in the back of the truck. Ended up putting the entire thing into the side of another vehicle, popping the back tire and jamming themselves tight, such that they couldn't move before they got hit by another car. All of that meant they were running down Henderson Ave, jewelry bags clutched in their hands, as if White Hood was after their tails and had his noose in his hand. They ran as far and as fast as possible, right into me as I was stepping out of a grocery store, clutching a treat for the night. Ice cream, cookies and cream. Get your head out of the gutter. I have never used my power in that way. Ever. When the first thug raised a gun at me, in surprise, I cried out a command automatically. Drop it. It worked. Well enough that I used it on the next thug who looked at me. Telling them to hold and stop was a little more considered. It was the first time someone pushed against my commands. Hard. I didn't take too well to that. When Hippo ran at me, I was a little distracted. When I tried to use my power against him and failed, I admit I was really surprised. You know, of course, because it's your job. But I didn't. Not as though I was a powers groupie, right? You know that powers have an inherent defense against other powers. Well, I didn't. Worse was the punch he leveled against me. I must admit, I'm still grateful that he chose to contain his strength. Tapped me gently even with all the strength that he actually had. Otherwise, my story would have ended quite differently. It's too bad I never had a chance to thank him in person. He was killed by the vulgar knight 3 years later. Damn vigilantes. Anyway, he hit me. I flew through the store window and woke up in cuffs. 5 years in jail. Minimum sentence for power-enabled crime. It was decided that I was a vigilante, that stopping the criminals was a criminal act, even if everything I had done was mostly reflexive in self-defense. All for a tub of ice cream and trying to stop real criminals. You can see why I never again tried to do the right thing. Well, outside the 𝗂𝗵𝗲 War. But that was an exceptional time. Alien invasions always are. 5 years in a maximum security prison, a powers prison, without access to my ability, but at the mercy of some of the most violent and dumb criminals, was an educational period. No early parole either, not for an empath like me. By the time I came out, I was a changed man. I won't talk about my time in prison. You have access to the records. There's nothing I want to add. It was a dark time, but most prison sentences are. I'd rather talk about what happened after, because that has more to do with who I became. The fact that I was in prison is sufficient for our purposes. There aren't many options for a criminal power when you leave prison, especially if you aren't a body. At least they can work construction, mining, demolition. Anything where being strong, tough, and hard to hurt is a prized asset. That's why most success stories of rehabilitated powers are bodies. The rest of us, they restrict how we use our powers, even demand that we don't wield them at all when they can get away with it. Sure, numerous human rights cases are fighting that. Some countries, Denmark, Mozambique, Ecuador, have made such laws and restrictions illegal. But most countries are still fighting the legal cases, or even ratifying the restrictions into law. Drug us, use dampener fields, even put us on surveillance. What kind of life is that? What kind of life can we have? But people are more intent on punishing than rehabilitating. more intent on control of the dangerous, scary, powered individual. Even if that power might be a secondary sense that can help someone now legally blind navigate the world. Because hey, maybe you shouldn't have mutated that overhanging brow that cuts off most of your vision and scared the children with your sharp teeth, eh? Civilians. Ignorant, hateful fools, one and all. No surprise so many turn to being a mask after a trip through the prison system. Disappear into the villain underground the moment they can. Most never surface. There's a lot of work out there supporting masks and more prosaic criminal activities. Bookkeepers to keep proper track of expenses and income. Gotta know the take and who might be skimming off the top. Security guards for bases and laundromats and pawn stores and bars, because you can't trust criminals not to steal. Plumbers and electricians and waitresses and cooks for sprawling bases underground. People who know to keep their mouths shut and their heads down. An entire underground economy right next to yours. Sometimes quite literally. 3 months after leaving prison, I disappeared into that underground economy. Tried giving the straight and narrow a try, but it didn't work. The power nullification collar around my neck was removed within an hour of my leaving. The next 7 years as a criminal were frustrating. You can guess that an individual with my power was rather in demand. I did everything from rooting out spies to security to B&E. Not that I was ever an official mask. I always declined those kinds of jobs. Getting into a villain team and making a name for yourself is just asking for a cape to develop a rivalry and chase you around, demanding that you become part of their rogues gallery and calling you their nemesis. It never ends then. What's the difference between a criminal power and a mask? Funny you should ask. Some don't think there's a difference, that every criminal power is a mask. Most of those people are idiots. As though the kid who has a useless power and shoplifts from their local store is the same as Scar. Different people have different definitions, but I would say it's a matter of infamy and intent. Masks want the name, the fame, and fear that comes with being known not just by the police, but the public too. Sure, some powers are so powerful that they get the name anyway. That kid who could fly and nearly rivaled Union in strength and durability, who tore up his town because he didn't know how to take no. What did they call him? Kid Savage? He just needed a proper spanking, I figure. Didn't kill anyone, but the public was so scared of him they made him a mask from day one. Yeah, some don't get a choice, but most who get the fame want it. On the other hand, your average criminal power just wants the money and to pay off their debts. None of them want the heat bothering capes brings. Not to say capes won't jump on you if they know a power is in play. But there's a difference between the flashy jobs a mask pulls off, hitting a bank in broad daylight, multiple jewelry stores, or heck, a kidnapping, and the kind of crimes professional criminals do. We'd rather wait until night, sneak into a store and take everything they have, than crash through the front door. It's that mindset that forced me to take 7 years to pay off the debts I'd accrued. Turning down the big flashy jobs, the high-paying, high-risk ones, for the steady and safe, is how I stayed out of prison until I was done. All my debts paid, or the masks I owed, either dead or locked up once more. Finally, I was free to do my own thing. So long as I didn't alert the government, so long as I never showed up on their databases. That's when I changed my face. Getting a new identity these days is harder than ever. You can't just have plastic surgery and call it a day. It doesn't work that way, not anymore. Big Brother has all of us on the line, and the Powers Defense Act means any exhibition of ability, even something as innocuous as mine, is registered and our details taken. When you get caught, they take even more. Facial image and bone structure, pupil, fingerprints, DNA, mystical aura, gait, and power wavelength. Even spiritual resonance, supposedly, though that might be a rumor. Still, if you know the right people and take it slow, you can get away with a lot. Just because they have all that data doesn't mean your average cop on the street has access to it. Heck, most capes can't swing their hand and grab that information. If you change things up, make minor corrections, take it slow, you're fine. Too bad I didn't take my own advice. The first thing I did was go for a complete physical makeover. Hard work at the gym, some help from a power-based personal trainer, and a lot of food shifted me from a tired old man with sticks for arms to a well-built, middle-aged silver fox. Add on facial sculpting, bone lengthening, and some movement training, and I was sorted physically. At least under cursory examination. Getting documentation for the new me wasn't difficult either. You'd be surprised how many deaths are never reported, bodies never properly issued a death certificate. Then, of course, are the even deeper covers. Wholesale identities created and carefully nurtured over decades, school reports physically altered and added to, minor mental manipulation to ensure people remember a person who never existed. The kind of false identity operation that you occasionally hear about in places like the hourly report, but who never get further publicity. The expensive kind. I didn't get that kind of identity. Didn't have the funds, though I got something nearly as good. After all that, it was just a matter of introducing Lenny Friedman to high society. After years of being poor and down on my luck, I was done with all that. If I was going to be a criminal, I figured I'd go all the way. The first step was getting appropriate clothing. In this case, 3 or 4 outfits that said rich, but didn't scream trying hard. That took most of my funds, even with a little gentle persuasion to get into the right places and be seen by the right stylists. You wouldn't believe how expensive a shirt and pants combo could be. Take them. I could, but why would I? That would just hurt the salesperson who helped me. They track everything in places like that. A single missing shirt could easily see them fired. I might be a criminal, but I'm no asshole. Anyway, I only needed to meet the right people. Using my power to get an invitation was easy. After that, all I had to do was socialize until I found the right target. He came swanning in one evening while I was trying to get laid. Hey, I'm a man. And no, I've never needed to use my power for that. I know you don't believe me. It's true, though. Power, the non-mutagen kind, and confidence can get you quite far. I might have nudged people into telling me their secrets, telling me what they really wanted, what they desired, but I never nudged them into bed. Doesn't matter, really. You'd be surprised how many women are just looking for someone who is willing to listen to them. And once they've poured out their hearts and not been judged for it, they're more than willing to slip out of a dress or two to show their gratitude. Trust me. Just listen. Anyway, the mark was George Sarantopoulos. Old school money that came from shipping, though they had expanded over the years. He was dissatisfied, though, being the 3rd son. After all, his older brothers were running the business. And him? Nothing but a wastrel, or so his family thought. He tried his hand at investing, trying to make a name, a fortune for himself. Power tech, to be specific. But you know how it is with power-based advancements. 2/3 of the time, it only works for those they build it for. The other third isn't replicable at all. Leaves a fraction of a fraction that can actually change society. End of the day, investing in power tech is a crapshoot. You can expect thousands of failures before you succeed. But that one success? If you get it, you could make a fortune. But the trials and travails of power tech investments wasn't something George could explain to his family. Not to a family that had built their fortune the old-fashioned way, one ship at a time. And not even old ships, where a journey across the world could end with ships capsized, but ships during the stable years, before powers became so common and global commerce was simple. So here George was, in New York, frozen out of all the family business decisions, and only with access to his personal fortune of $40 million. I know, cry me a river. But that was George. He really did expect people to do so. I guess when you fall from having access to billions, 40 million feels like being penniless. Worse, Most of his hangers-on and acquaintances just wanted to pitch him a new power tech project, a new business, or even a party they wanted him to grace, along with his usual retinue of babes. Luckily for George, that wasn't what I wanted him for. No, all I needed the schmuck for was his apartment. Sliding up to him at the party, after ditching my initial target, was simple enough. I had to gently persuade a few of his retinue to make scarce, what with their jealously guarded positions as leeches threatened. I guess like can recognize like. Once I made friendly with George, I just needed to put a little pressure on him when we were alone, and bam! I had an invitation to stay for a few days at his apartment while I settled into the Big Apple in style. Of course, a few days would become months, but he didn't need to know that. Once I'd settled in for a few days, sending him on another investment research mission to Antigua was simple enough. Of course, I'm not completely heartless. I knew some of the criminals down there were looking for a sucker who might take some of their power tech public, so I figured I'd kill two birds with one stone. Even better, since it was an actual investment opportunity, he was going to be gone for a while, and he handed me the keys and his public blessing to make use of the space while he was gone. Everything on the up and up, no one to question why I was at George's place. Next came funds. That was simple enough to acquire with the right address, attendance at the right parties, and even throwing some of the right events once I was properly introduced. After all, now I was a known factor, an individual they could trust. When I actually helped put two and two together in the same room, got a deal sorted, well, let's say things happened fast. No, I won't say what that first deal was. It's none of your business, and it was a personal type. As I said, I'm not an asshole. There was money to be made being the man between, knowing who had what to sell, who had the right interest. Other people could do it, of course. Other people did it, but none of them had my power. Of course, I'd learned by then that all I had to do was push a little. The nudges no one noticed were the most effective, not the mental shoves that sent them sprawling, chasing after their sense of self. 5 minutes with Zola? Just 5? For me? Golf? Sure I can play. You do need a fourth, right? Because I know just the person. Tickets to the Met? I might be able to wrangle you a pair, but you have to tell me what you and Elise were doing last night. Gossip, innuendo, connections, social proof when I moved out and got my own place, with an appropriately lavish, well-attended party. Had an upcoming pop starlet do the entertainment. Had the cosmic raver, you remember him, don't you? Former cape-turned-musician, now a DJ and light show. And enough alcohol and food to drown an orphanage. We partied for 3 days, and everyone who was anyone came over. The money was good. The money was very good, especially after decades of scrimping and hiding and not being able to use my power properly. I should have stopped there. No one cares if you nudge a billionaire to invest in a millionaire's pet project, or if you put two good-looking socialites together, or get an up-and-coming actress access to her future sugar daddy. After all I did was nudge. The rest was up to them. I should have stopped there. But the thing about hanging around with the ultra-wealthy, all that money that seemed enough at first, it wasn't. I understood George's point of view more than ever. I wanted more. Ever more. Greed. That was my downfall. How bloody pedestrian. It started out innocently enough. An older lady wanting in company but not funds. We became friends. Dolores had the best gossip and great connections, so we hung out. Once a week over high tea, she would tell me all about high society, and I would sup on cucumber sandwiches at an exclusive club near Central Park. It didn't cost me much, and she didn't mind if I arrived hungover either. Then she broke her hip. Old people and falls, that most dangerous of events. She had no one, at least no one who would take care of her. They wanted her to hire a nursing aide, maids, all that jazz. Throw money at the problem, not feelings. Perhaps I shouldn't have, but I took her in. She just needed a place to stay, someone to watch over her, pick things up. It wasn't hard, and I was switching stages in my career anyway. No more wild parties, no more long nights of revelry. More dinner parties and galas, smoking rooms and golf courses, spas and tennis. A healthier and simpler lifestyle for someone at my age. A better class of people, too. So I cared for her. It gave me an excuse for the transition. Cut out the parties, spend more time at home. She needed help, needed company. But my power is influencing minds and emotions, not the body. As much as I could help, I couldn't stop the turning of the clock. I never exploited Dolores. Let me be clear. Didn't even need to use my power on her. We were just friends. When she died, she willed me her place upstate. Boy, was that a mess. She had lawyers all set up to deal with her vultures of a family. Smart cookie, Dolores was. Figured since they weren't willing to spend time with her in the end, she owed them little. Not that everyone didn't get something, but it wasn't what they wanted. The lawyers dealt with the majority. Those who weren't discouraged, I had my power. Moving into the compound was a thing. Sprawling across multiple acres, it had extensive grounds, a large main building, multiple smaller ones, gardens galore. I hired some old cons, people I knew from the before time who needed a leg up. Powers who wouldn't mind living in a nice residence and doing some basic yard work. The fact that they also acted as security when needed was a bonus. Really. I just intended to help out some of my old friends, my old connections. We aren't a criminal organization. Hiring them, giving them a chance to have a well-paying job, that's the least we can do. After all, isn't that the point of serving time? That we've paid back whatever debt there might be to society? So why can we never have real jobs? I settled in, got back into the swing of things. Saw people, helped them fix their problems. Men, women, young, old. My reputation as a fixer had grown, warped a little. Some came to my new residence because they thought I could put them on the right course for success, for love. Sometimes I could. Often I couldn't, at least not the way they thought. But the successes were my bane, because they left happy. And if the wealthy are missing any one thing in aggregate, it's that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anything as trite as money doesn't buy happiness. The poor can tell you it can certainly buy certain kinds of joy. The contentment of a full stomach. The peace of knowing you've got a roof over your head next month. The joy of buying a birthday gift for someone you love. Money can buy certain kinds of joy. The problem comes when you've bought everything it can. When everything else is taken care of, when you have everything you could need, then the one thing you can't buy is ever so stark. It's like the missing piece in a jigsaw. Frustrating, itch-inducing, maddening. You'd pay anything to fill it, but for once, you can't. So what do? You search, you look, you try. When the rumors of a man who can fill that hole appear, you look him up. It probably didn't help that I didn't want to deal with the rich at first. Every man has a price, they say. I'm rather embarrassed to say mine was only $1 million. $1 million to see Alexander Locke, billionaire mogul, the devil to many. The man with 2 ex-wives, a dozen children, and countless girlfriends. Wealthy scion of an oil baron family, and an even luckier entrepreneur to have backed the family when they had just emerged. Billionaire, philanthropist, self-labeled genius, and most of all, repressed homosexual. What was I supposed to say when the briefcase came in, carried by his pair of bodyguards, and he looked all kinds of excited and eager? What was I supposed to say? Your problem is you can't love anyone till you truly love yourself? I can tell you what you need to do, but you won't like it? Your family messed you up, and you've got to let all of that go? I did. All of those things. In gentle and firmer ways over the course of nearly 3 hours, But of course, he didn't believe me. Demanded I fix it without him actually doing any real work. Holding true to the truth during that first meeting took everything I had. I'm not a good person. I told you that. I'm a weak man. I stayed honest for one meeting, held true to the truth, didn't utilize my power beyond nudging him here and there to try to accept what I had to say. Even if I got him to agree to a sentence, had him saying yes and yes and yes, at that last moment he'd always balk. Wouldn't see the truth for what it was. Wouldn't speak it out loud. Not to me, not to himself. So we ended that first meeting with everyone unhappy. But I was $1 million richer anyway. The second meeting, another $1 million, and I did what he wanted, what he demanded I do, because he knew I could. Yeah, he'd figured it out. With that much money, with all the power he had, working out something like that wasn't hard. So I did. I made him happy. It wouldn't last. It couldn't. But the drugs, the change to his brain chemistry, the basic programming could be tweaked. All that time learning, studying, practicing had some practical effects. It worked for about a month, but such changes can't last. The human body, the human mind, knows how to protect itself. Yes, even against unearned happiness and contentment. 1 month became 3 weeks. That became 10 days, then 5, 2. In the end, he chose to move near my compound. Bought the place next door so he could just wander over. I'll admit, the changes Alexander made to my property weren't entirely against my will. But my other patients, those who needed help, wanted some form of closure or therapy or just for me to do my old job. They enjoyed the extra space, the buildings that Alexander set up after a while, the hidden nooks for other kinds of pleasure. More than that, the patients who wanted more, needed more care, came in numbers. Stayed with Alexander at first, then in the guest houses he created. Like called to like, and those like Alexander, who had a gaping hole that needed filling, appeared faster and faster. Funny that I managed to fill a few too, even by accident. But I was no longer using my power in nudges. I was hiding it, of course, in meditation practices, in seances, and aromatherapy and yoga. In moments of zen forced upon others, while my power slowly dug in and made them happy. For some people, the company they kept, the community we created, filled a hole. Going out, doing good, giving money to others and seeing those real-world effects. There's a whole world of difference between donating $1 million to an art gallery that barely needs the money and going to a homeless shelter and helping cook the food those very people would eat later. Put you in touch with others, and then, well, often they'd actually spend more money anyway. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't doing all this charitable work, all this yoga and meditation and awareness practice, just because I'm a good person. Frankly, building something that benefited my patients was easier than taking their money and using my powers. I couldn't be everywhere all the time, and I was still trying to hide. The fear of being caught and being sent to prison again, of having it all taken away, still existed. How much good has been done, do you think, for the wrong reasons? All through human history? A lot, I would bet. It doesn't matter. I did good with my organization. Not like the Capes, saving the world or fighting masks, but we put in new wells, fixed up old buildings and shattered neighborhoods after the Capes were done with their city-spanning fights. We rehabilitated masks with good powers, got them jobs that benefited from their gifts or their interests. We did good. Not that anyone cares. Yeah, maybe I'm a little bitter. Because when you all came and tore down the Institute, scattered the community and drove those who had found themselves a place, you never once stopped to look at the good we did, or the destruction you caused. And for what? A half-dozen billionaires, a score of multimillionaires who were getting exactly what they asked for. A bunch of others who were never exploited, but were there because they'd found a community. All to save the fools who, even after they were warned it wasn't what they needed, demanded satisfaction. Yeah, no. I'm the mask here, I'm the villain. Oh, poor little rich men and women, boo-hoo-hoo. Typical. Oh, why have I not asked who was the Judas who betrayed me to the Capes in the end? It doesn't matter. I betrayed myself first, and everything since that moment was delayed reckoning. I knew better than to take the money, to let Alexander move in, to use my power in that way. I knew better. Everything else, it was a consequence of my choices. What? I had to do all the meditation and mushrooms and yoga classes too. I had to learn those things about my patients and, finally, myself. I'm not a good person, but I'm no mask, no matter what all of you think. The Legion came in one bright Sunday morning, all shiny and new and excited to smash everything apart. They were surprised when there was no such fight. No one tried to fight them, not even me. Years of development was destroyed one sunny morning, but mostly metaphorically. Physically, the compound is still there. I hear it's a theme park now. The actual death of the Institute took 2 years, mostly because that's how slow the court system moves. I held on to hope, that we could put things together again. Right till the end of the trial. Right till the judgment and the sentence. That's when I ran. You don't need to know how I did it. Let's just say that knowing the end was coming meant I had a lot of time to plan. Time to move money offshore into accounts you can't touch or don't know about. Time to make contacts with governments and individuals who accept things as they are and not the way they want it to be. Time to put plans in place and build the compound anew. Funny how so many of my victims came and helped of their own free will. So here we are, doing this interview so you can tell your readers about me, about the new compound and my cult. Here's what you need to know. We'll try to fix you if you can be fixed. We'll try to give you peace if that's what you want. But remember, what you want is not what you need sometimes. In the end, we will give you what you want if you insist. Because I'm not a mask, but I'm not a good man. I'm weak, and I like money. So make sure you can pay. The end. This has been The Cultist by Tao Wang, performed by P.J. Morgan. Copyright 2023 by Tao Wang. Production copyright 2023 by Starlit Publishing.
Frigid Relations, a Powers, Masks, and Capes short story. Written by Tao Wang. Narrated by Riley Cabrera. Local hero saves the Yukon quest. Kelly knew that was going to be the headline in the White Horse Star. The new editor was not particularly creative with their titles, preferring to go with the simple and traditional rather than innovative or creative. That was fine. It made her job easy. All she had to do was a piece on their elusive power, the local Dawson City resident who'd frozen the Yukon River. Problem was, he was a loner, one of the 500 or so residents that lived in the city over the long winter. Not that it was getting that cold these days, which was the entire point of the article, and her subsequent $50 job. $75 if she took the photo herself, which she intended to do. Every dollar counted, though maybe she could ask for hardship pay, having to snowshoe all the way to his cabin. At least it was warmish today, only -15°C, excluding wind chill. With only a mild breeze, walking along the frozen river was chilly but not life-threatening. Peaceful, even, with the pristine and bright white of a recent snowfall which deadened the quiet winter afternoon. Each breath she took froze the inside of her nostrils, that indescribable smell of fresh snow and frozen sap all around. Even better, she caught her prey as he was coming down the river, stomping along without a care in the world and a simple gray plaid North Face jacket. "Thomas Nagano?" she called out. When he didn't twitch, she tried again. "You're Thomas Nagano, right? The power that froze the river?" Nearer now, she could see more details about his face. No toque or hat, which showcased the close-cropped black hair, clean-shaven unlike 3/4 of the population in Dawson this time of year. His eyes were hidden by the only nod to winter, a pair of wraparound sunglasses.
"No need to shout. I heard you the first time. I am. Your freezer give out? You should just put it outside. It's cold enough. Be fine for the next while."
No. I left a message for you. I'm the reporter." Kelly still felt a flush of pride saying it. Sure, she was an amateur. That was all the star could afford, after all. But she was still one. Finally. "For the interview?"
"I told them I didn't want to do it."
"The interview?"
"That too."
Thomas came to a stop, arms crossed in front of him. She was surprised to note there was no puff of moisture as he spoke, as though he was too cold for the air to react. She didn't respond, though. Knew better not to. Most powers didn't like it, and they were common enough that even her small classroom of a dozen kids had one when she was growing up. Of course, Neil's ability to take colors, temporarily, from things was nowhere as useful or powerful as Thomas's. In fact, considering what he had done, there was no reason he wasn't an actual cape. Or worst, a mask. A mask hiding out in the wilds. That thought thrilled her, at the expose she might unleash. Foolish. If he was a mask, he would never have agreed to freeze the river in the first place.
"You want to sit down?"
He jerked his head backwards, to the cabin she could see just behind a stand of trees on the riverbank. The edges of the cabin, at least.
"A touch warmer in there than here. Less wind, at least."
"Yeah, sure. Yes." She smiled, bobbed ahead, followed as he led her over to his log cabin in the woods, a small smile on her face still from her non-existent expose. He dropped the battered blue metal camp cup on the table, still steaming from the hot tea. He finished pouring tea into his own cup beside hers, placed the glass teapot down, and then proceeded to lean against the side of the wall, watching her. She thanked him absently, looking around the cramped single-room log cabin with its old wood heater and stove combo, the place filled with that wondrous smell of burnt wood and slow-cooking stew. "You've lived here for a while?" she surmised, eyeing the plethora of knickknacks covering every inch of available horizontal space.
"A few years. Not that long."
Glanced around, smiled slightly.
"It's not as much as you think. There's just not a lot of space."
"And you're not from here, right?" she said.
"No. Ontario originally. Kingston. Though I spent a few years in Toronto itself before."
He trailed off. "Before?"
"The power. It comes to us differently. Different times, space, events."
She nodded. They said everyone had a latent ability, but not everyone managed to activate it, though the numbers had risen recently. No one knew why, even if there were quite a few hypotheses. Changes in the environment, a tipping point in genetic material, maybe a virus released by a brain making changes. It didn't matter, not for most people.
"Mine happened when I was taking a shower."
"A shower?"
"Yeah."
He looked uncomfortable, shrugged.
"Water was too cold, so I made it hotter."
"Hotter?" she said, realized she was acting like a parrot, shook her head, apologized.
"It's fine. Yeah. My power, it's not anything amazing. Not a real cape power. It's slow, you know? But I can make myself... the things I touch change temperature."
He shrugged.
"Slowly."
"So the river..."
"Took a lot of work. But it's all one thing, once you start with a spot of ice. Then you expand it, you see? Just keep adding, a little at a time. Takes a long time, but I just need a spot and some help from, well, up there. Once it gets deep enough, it's pretty insulated. The water's all really cold already, you know?
Thomas said. She did. Glacier-fed waters made the Yukon River a brilliant blue-green. What happens to the heat?
Ah.
He tapped his own cup with his finger, the steam billowing upwards.
I contain it in me. Some of it. Release some. The rest?
He shrugged.
That's for the scientists to figure out. Not that they cared that much when I showed it off. Said it was similar to others and then sent me on my way.
Grinned suddenly.
Paid me $250, though.
And you came to live in Dawson City because…
Work. The call of the wild.
Thomas smiled then, looking out of one of the smaller windows, looking wistful. Outside, the trees waved and bowed and little swirls of snow drifted.
Not much to it. I take the heat, store it within me. Come spring and summer, the mining companies, they hire me to help warm up their sites. Allows them to start mining faster, you know?
She did, for she'd been born and bred up here. The gold mining companies stripped the earth, dug in deep and ran the broken ground through their filters. It made for a lot of earth being moved, and if the ground was still frozen, made it impossible. Someone who could move up their timetable was a godsend, since the number of months they could work was still seriously curtailed, climate change or not. How did they know to contact you? Why?
When I'm not working, I'm always storing heat.
Thomas shrugged.
I do that for the town. Heat up the freezers, even have a small side business. If it wasn't underneath the snow, you'd see my metal blocks. I chill them, rent them out during the summer so that houses can stay a little cooler.
That works? She said, surprised.
A little. Not enough, really, except if the room's small. But there's a few places I swing by, like Diamond Tooth's Gertie,
he said.
They don't mind me sitting around, watching and keeping the place cool. Pay me a little, too. It covers the bills when the miners don't need me no more.
She frowned. There were a dozen things he could do with his ability. More. As though he could see the questions and answers in her eyes, he spoke.
I don't need more. Just enough to cover the bills. Save a little. Maybe go on a trip once in a while.
A gesture around the simple house.
I'm comfortable, and I sure don't want to be a cape, you know? It's dangerous.
Of course. She sipped at her tea, mulling his answers. It had cooled quite fast. The room they were within, not that much warmer than outside. Enough, at least, that she wasn't wearing her hat. So, the quest?
Right. Well, as I said, I'm known. When the river wasn't freezing again, they came to me. Told me that if they couldn't get it to run again this year, the government was going to pull their funding. Something about regulations.
He picked up his own cup, drank it all, and then poured more tea in from the teapot. Frowned as he realized it was running empty and turned sideways, reaching backwards to place a hand against the metal kettle on the stove.
They said, well, they asked if I was okay trying it.
And that was it? You said yes, and it just began freezing the river?
Pretty much. We had to cut our way a bit further up from the city, of course. Started freezing a patch of ground, let it spread, and keep it going, following the ice in the banks. Had to sleep outside just to make sure it stuck.
Sounds uncomfortable, she said sympathetically.
Wasn't the worst?
Wasn't the best either, she filled in for him. She was beginning to get a feel for this quiet man. So, if they had you, why the late announcement?
Oh, that.
He paused, removed his hand from the steaming kettle, and refilled the teapot. The tea bag slipped within, bobbing up and down as dark tea mixed with new water. Kelly blinked, then raised her cup to cover her surprise.
Well, it wasn't working that well at first. It kept getting too warm, you know?
Memories of the early part of the winter, so warm that the kids were walking around in a single layer, rose. She nodded, before he continued.
I was getting pretty tired of sleeping outdoors in tents, not having much luck getting the ice thick enough. Then there was that cold snap.
He snapped his fingers in turn, startling her.
Suddenly, it got a lot easier. The river started crystallizing, just like that. Made it easier to keep deepening it all, even if the water still ran.
That's really cool. And all that heat, you store it?
Yeah.
How much can you store? She asked curiously. Thomas only answered with a shrug. It was enough for now. After that, she just needed some other details. His full name, a photo. Filing the article would take her the rest of the day if she worked late. She figured she would. After all, it was her first real job. The trio of scientists stood around the readouts, still in their hazmat suits. They traded subtle glances, none willing to speak first and state the obvious. How long they would have stood there, no one knew. For Paragon, it did not matter. They did not matter, as he read the dials and the printout. A voice, the smartest of them, confirmed his thoughts.
Linear growth, not exponential. But it does not seem to be stopping, does it?
The Paragon said. No. The erstwhile leader straightened, offered the Paragon a nod.
And all of you've tried hasn't stopped it?
No. We had some others come by, Powers and Capes. We can slow it down, and we've got them working in shifts to hold the temperature steady. But they're all getting exhausted. It just keeps going. She shuffled her feet, embarrassed. We don't know when it'll end. If it will. We need to run more tests. We need more time. But if it keeps increasing...
Yes.
The Paragon sighed, looking away from the monitor and the scientists to the remnants of the lab. The problem with Powers and their random abilities and the scientists who felt the need to research such things was sometimes accidents happened. Like a portal to another world, an alien piece of technology they could not turn off. Sometimes accidents happened. Only then did they cry for help.
I'll make a call. We'll find something.
Thomas never expected to meet a real Cape. Strange, how a small article in the paper would result in his life being interrupted. It probably wouldn't have happened if she hadn't included the line about his infinite potential. Now, here he was, staring at a pulsing red organic and tech construct, asked to touch the object and keep the rising heat level. For how long, they couldn't say, nor whether touching it would mutate him or give him cancer or some alien virus. All they could promise was that he would be compensated well for his time, be made as comfortable as possible while he was here, and that he would receive care from the best-powered healer possible, if necessary. Well and good. But what had swayed Thomas at the end was the final promise. They would not, in any circumstance, let the press know about his involvement. Once bitten, twice shy after all. Who knew what other troubles would arrive if he repeated his past mistakes?
Any time, Mr. Nagano.
Paragon sounded patient, but then again, he always did. Man could take an ICBM to the face and still patiently ask you to stop wasting ammunition. That meme still circulated, though less frequently these days.
We had to use every other cape to lower the temperature to what it is now. So, if you could... Yeah.
Thomas raised his hand, pushed it forward. Felt nothing beyond a slight sponginess. Then, reaching inwards, he began to pull on the heat. Kept tugging it in, storing it away in that space within him that wasn't really inside. Hurt his head to even think about it, really. It's working! The voice was excited, loud and female. It annoyed him.
Told you.
Thomas looked around, pulled the chair that closer with his foot and sat down. Feet stuck out, head leaned back, getting comfortable. He had no idea how long he'd be here. Maybe he could ask for a footstool and a TV. Troublesome, all this. Which was he never wanted to get involved. Too much damn trouble. Will he be fine? Kelly said, shifting on her feet. She could see him in the distance behind the protective glass. Relegated to the press area, the only person here. Her prize for breaking the story, for being around when it happened, for having her first story pulled and disappeared. Of course, she couldn't write about Thomas again. That had been explained to her. But the resolution of this story, the aversion of a potential catastrophe, so long as she kept his name and involvement out, it was hers. her first big break as a reporter, and all thanks to a single interview. Maybe she'd buy him dinner when he got out. The end. This has been Frigid Relations, a Powers, Masks and Capes short story, written by Tao Wong, narrated by Riley Cabrera. Copyright 2024, Tao Wong. Production copyright 2024, Starlit Publishing.